Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I don't talk about this much. Most people would think I'm making it up or was just seeing things, but I swear on everything I care about that this happened exactly as I'm going to tell it. It was July of 2005, and I had just finished my freshman year of college. I was 19, back home in northern Minnesota for the summer, and spending as much time as possible with my two high school friends before we all went our separate ways again. It was one of those perfect Minnesota summer evenings, the kind that make you forget about the brutal winters. The air was warm, but not humid, with a slight breeze coming off Lake Superior. We decided to head to this small, secluded dock on a quiet part of the lake. It was our spot, had been since high school. We'd go there to hang out, swim, sometimes have a few beers when no one was around, though we weren't drinking that night. The dock was old wood, nothing fancy, just jutting out maybe 30 feet into the water. Behind it was dense forest that went back for miles. We got there around 6 in the evening and spent hours swimming and messing around in the water. As the sun started to set, the temperature dropped a bit. I got cold and climbed up to sit on the dock with just my feet dangling in the water. My friends were still swimming around, splashing each other about 15 feet from the dock. That's when everything changed. I heard it first. Heavy footsteps coming from the wooded area behind me, not like a deer or something small. These were heavy, like someone big was walking through the underbrush, snapping twigs and rustling leaves. I remember thinking it was probably just some hiker, so I turned around casually to look. I still get chills remembering what I saw. Standing at the edge of the tree line was this thing. Calling it a figure doesn't do justice to how substantial and real it was. It was massive, just absolutely huge, and covered in thick black hair from head to toe. But what really got me, what made my blood turn to ice, were its eyes. They had this faint red glow to them, like dying embers. Not bright like headlights or anything, but definitely glowing enough that I could see them clearly even from where I was sitting. I couldn't move. My entire body just froze up. This thing was built like no animal or human I've ever seen. Its muscles weren't just big. They were these bulging cords that wrapped around its chest, shoulders, and arms in ways that didn't even seem possible. Its arms hung down to its knees. I remember noticing that specifically because it looked so wrong, so unnatural. And its legs, Jesus, they were like tree trunks, flexing with power every time it shifted its weight. It was wider than the dock I was sitting on. I'd estimate it stood at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. This wasn't some guy in a suit. No way. The proportions were all wrong for a human, and the way it moved was too fluid, too natural. I don't know how long I stared at it before I managed to call out to my friends. My voice came out as this pathetic croak at first. When I finally got their attention and they looked where I was pointing, I saw their faces go through the same transformation mine must have: confusion, then disbelief, then pure terror. One of my friends, the one who was always quickest to think in a crisis, whispered, "Get in the water, hide under the dock now." But I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed. The thing stepped forward, coming fully out of the tree line now. It was shifting its weight from foot to foot like it was agitated or nervous. I could hear its breathing from where I sat. These short, hard bursts that somehow carried across the distance between us. Its massive hands kept opening and closing at its sides, and its entire body seemed to be trembling with this weird, nervous energy. Then it made a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. This deep, vibrating growl that literally shook the dock beneath me. I felt it in my chest, in my bones. It wasn't like any animal sound I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a wolf, nothing from this world. It was deeper, more primal. That sound broke my paralysis. I scrambled off the dock and into the water, following my friends who were already swimming underneath. The water was freezing cold, but I barely noticed. We clung to the support beams under the dock, trying not to make a sound. My teeth were chattering, but I clenched my jaw shut, terrified that it would hear me. We could hear the creature walking onto the dock. The wood groaned under its weight in a way it never did with humans. Each step sent vibrations through the entire structure. It stopped directly above us. I remember pressing myself as flat against the beam as I could, convinced that at any second a massive hairy arm would reach down and grab me. Through a gap between the boards, I could see parts of it. Its feet were enormous, easily twice the size of my own, with these thick, dirty nails that looked almost like claws. The black hair covered everything, even down to the ankles. Its legs were so thick that each one was probably the size of my torso. I heard it sniffing, taking these deep breaths like it was trying to catch our scent. We had left a backpack on the dock with our phones and keys inside. I watched as one enormous hand reached down and picked it up. The backpack looked like a child's toy in its grip. It sniffed at the bag, turned it over a couple times, then casually tossed it aside. It kept standing there, directly above us. At one point, I'm pretty sure it knew we were under the dock. It seemed to be looking down at the water, maybe even seeing our shapes beneath the surface. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. It stomped once, hard, making the entire dock shudder. Not like it was trying to break through to get us, but more like a warning. Like it was telling us it knew exactly where we were and could get to us if it wanted to. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, it started walking back toward shore. The dock creaked and swayed with each step. We stayed absolutely still, none of us daring to move until we were sure it was gone. We waited under that dock for at least half an hour after we couldn't hear it anymore. My muscles were cramping from the cold water and from holding onto the beam for so long. Finally, when we couldn't stand it anymore, we cautiously swam to the shore on the opposite side from where the creature had gone. We grabbed our stuff and ran to the car, faster than I've ever moved in my life. No one said a word until we were inside, with the doors locked. Then we all started talking at once, confirming with each other that yes, we had all seen the same thing. The drive home was a blur. We kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced that this thing was somehow following us. We talked about reporting it to someone. But who would believe us? The park rangers would think we were drunk or high. The police would laugh us out of the station. So we just went home, each of us shaken to our core. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red embers staring back at me. I kept hearing that deep, vibrating growl that seemed to resonate through my entire body. I couldn't stop thinking about those massive hands opening and closing, like they were just waiting to grab me. For weeks afterward, I couldn't go near wooded areas, even in broad daylight. I still get uneasy around forests at dusk. My friends and I have talked about it a few times over the years, but mostly we avoid the subject. It's like there's this unspoken agreement that we experience something that doesn't fit into the normal world, and talking about it just makes it more real. I've read about Bigfoot sightings since then. Most of them describe a creature that's large, but otherwise just looks like a hairy human. What we saw was different. The proportions were wrong. The red eyes, that sound it made, its sheer size and power. This wasn't just some undiscovered primate. This was something else entirely. The part that still bothers me the most is that it clearly saw us, clearly knew where we were hiding, and chose to leave us alone, like it was showing mercy, or maybe it was just warning us that we were in its territory. I don't know which possibility is more terrifying. I've never gone back to that dock. I never will. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has seen it there, if there have been other encounters that people are too scared or embarrassed to talk about. All I know is that something impossible exists in those woods by Lake Superior. Something that shouldn't be real, but is. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep at night, I still hear that deep, vibrating growl, and I wonder if somewhere out in those dark forests, it remembers me too. Story 2. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Even now, typing this out makes my hands shake a little. What happened that evening in '85 changed something in me, and I've never really been able to explain it to anyone who wasn't there. It was August 7th, 1985. I remember the date clearly because it was 2 days before my older sister's birthday, and we were all excited about the party my parents had planned. We lived in Morley, Alberta back then, right on the edge of where civilization ends and wilderness begins. Our house sat maybe a quarter mile from dense forest, with this perfect clearing nearby that we used as our makeshift baseball field. That evening was absolutely perfect. The sun was starting to sink, casting this golden light across everything, but it was still plenty bright enough to play. The air had that late summer feel, warm but with just the slightest hint that fall was coming. I was 12 at the time, my brother was 14, my sister was turning 16 in 2 days, and our cousin who was staying with us that summer was 13. We'd been playing baseball for maybe an hour. Nothing fancy. Just us four with an old bat and ball my dad had given me for Christmas the year before. The clearing was our sanctuary. We'd trampled the grass down over the years into what resembled a diamond. We'd placed rocks as the bases. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I was up to bat. My brother was pitching, my sister was behind me as catcher, and my cousin was somewhere in the outfield. I remember feeling so content in that moment. The kind of simple happiness that you don't appreciate until you're older. The sound of crickets was just starting, mixing with our laughter and trash talk. Then it happened. The first scream cut through the evening air like a physical force. I can't emphasize enough how it felt like the sound actually hit us. My brother had just wound up for a pitch, and his arm froze mid-motion. The ball never left his hand. It's so hard to describe that sound accurately. It started like a siren, this high-pitched wail that seemed to climb higher and higher until it shouldn't have been possible. But then, instead of fading like a normal siren, it changed. It dropped into this deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the air around us. It was as if someone had combined the sound of an air raid siren with the most aggressive, angry bear you could imagine, but amplified to an impossible volume. We all just stood there, completely frozen. I remember looking at my brother's face and seeing this expression I'd never seen before, pure, unfiltered fear. His eyes were so wide I could see white all around his pupils. "What was that?" my cousin whispered from the outfield. His voice sounded tiny and wrong after the massive sound we'd just heard. Before anyone could answer, it came again. The second scream was somehow worse because we were anticipating it. It started with that same impossible siren wail, climbing higher and higher until it hurt my ears, and then dropping into that growling sound that seemed to reach inside my chest and squeeze. It was louder this time, or maybe closer. I couldn't tell. I don't remember dropping the bat. I don't remember any of us saying anything. 1 second we were frozen in place, and the next we were running, all four of us sprinting toward our house like our lives depended on it. I've never run so fast in my life. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. All I could focus on was our back porch light that Mom had turned on as dusk approached. That light was safety. That light was everything. As we ran, the screaming continued. A third scream, a fourth. Each one seemed to be gaining on us, though that could have been my imagination running wild. The sound had this quality that made it impossible to locate. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My sister reached the back door first. She yanked it open with such force I thought she'd tear it off the hinges. My cousin was right behind her, then my brother, then me. I remember stumbling on the steps, scraping my knee badly but barely feeling it. The adrenaline was too much. The fear was too much. We burst into the kitchen where my mom was preparing dinner, all of us talking at once, breathless and terrified. I remember her face changing from surprise to concern as she took in our wild-eyed panic. "Something's out there," my brother managed to say between gasps for air. "Something screaming." My mom went to the window and pulled the curtain aside just as another scream tore through the air. Even through the walls of our house, it was deafening. I watched my mom's face drain of color. She let the curtain fall back and quickly moved to lock the door. "Where's Dad?" I remember asking, my voice sounding strange and small to my own ears. "Still at work," she said, trying to sound calm but failing. "He'll be home in an hour." That hour was the longest of my life. We huddled in the living room, away from the windows, as the screaming continued outside. Sometimes it would stop for 5 or 10 minutes, making us hope it was over, only to start again with renewed intensity. My mom called our neighbor, Mr. Winters, who lived about half a mile down the road. He was an old hunter who'd lived in the area his whole life. I remember hearing only my mom's side of the conversation. "Yes, we can hear it too. No, I've never. The kids were outside when it started. No, they're all inside now. Do you know what it could be?" When she hung up, she told us Mr. Winters was just as confused as we were. He'd lived in these parts for over 60 years and had never heard anything like it. He said it wasn't a cougar, wasn't a bear, wasn't a wolf, wasn't an elk, wasn't anything he could identify. That's what scared me the most. The idea that there was something out there that even Mr. Winters couldn't name. The screaming finally stopped about 20 minutes before my dad got home. We don't know how long it continued after we made it inside. It could have been 30 minutes or more. When my dad arrived, we all started talking at once again, trying to explain what we'd heard. He listened, his expression growing more concerned, then went outside with a flashlight, despite my mom begging him not to. He came back in about 15 minutes later, saying he hadn't found anything unusual. No tracks, no signs of any large animal, nothing disturbed or out of place, just our baseball equipment scattered across the clearing where we'd dropped it. That night, none of us kids slept alone. My sister and I shared her bed, while my brother and cousin camped out on the living room floor. I remember lying awake for hours, straining to hear any sound outside, jumping at every creak of the house settling or the wind in the trees. The next day, my dad and Mr. Winters went back to the clearing and the surrounding woods to look around in daylight. They still found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no signs that anything unusual had been there. We told a few other neighbors about what happened, but most just shrugged it off as one of those things. Some suggested it was just a strange echo of a known animal, or maybe some kind of industrial equipment from the distant logging operation miles away. But those explanations never sat right with me. Whatever made that sound wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't any normal animal. In the weeks that followed, we kids never went back to that clearing alone. We'd only go in a group, and only during bright daylight. We never stayed until evening again, and for the rest of that summer, we'd freeze at any unusual sound, our eyes meeting in silent communication. Was that it? Is it back? It never did come back, at least not that we heard, but something changed in me that evening. I'd always found comfort in the wilderness around our home. After that day, I felt like a stranger there, like I was being watched. The forest that had once seemed so familiar suddenly held secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. I'm 49 years old now. I've heard all kinds of animal calls over the years. I've listened to audio recordings of every predator native to Alberta. I've even gone down the rabbit hole of cryptid research, listening to supposed recordings of everything from Bigfoot to more obscure local legends. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever matched what we heard that evening. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain I've just heard that siren growl again. It's always just a dream, but the fear is real. The memory of that sound has never faded. The way it paralyzed us with fear, the way it seemed to physically press against my chest, the way it changed from that impossible wail to that deep, threatening growl. It was unlike anything I've experienced before or since. I don't know what was in those woods that August evening in 1985, but whatever it was, it knew we were there. And sometimes I can't shake the feeling that it was calling to us specifically. That's the thought that still keeps me up at night. Story 3. I've debated sharing this for years. It's not easy talking about something when you know most people will think you're crazy or making it up. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened in early June 1994. I'd taken my 2 sons fishing at this beaver pond we'd visit sometimes, about 30 miles from our home in western Colorado. The boys were 11 and 13 at the time. I'd been teaching them to fish since they could hold a rod, and these little trips were our special thing. That afternoon had been perfect. Clear skies, not too hot, and the fish were biting well. The boys had caught several nice rainbow trout, and I was enjoying just watching them, seeing how they'd grown into handling everything themselves. It was getting close to dusk, maybe around 6:30 or so. The light was starting to get that golden quality it gets before sunset, and we were thinking about packing up in about half an hour. The beaver pond sits in this little clearing with forest surrounding it on all sides. It's pretty remote. You have to drive down an old logging road to get there, and then hike about a quarter mile through the trees. That's when we heard it. I've spent my entire life outdoors. 20+ years of bow hunting at that point. Countless fishing trips, camping, hiking. I know what animals sound like. I've heard elk bugling, mountain lions screaming, bears roaring, coyotes howling. This wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. The first scream came from about 200 yards away, deep in the forest to our east. It's hard to describe the sound accurately. It wasn't a howl or a roar. It was a scream, but with this gravelly quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. The volume was what got me first. It was impossibly loud, like it was being amplified through some kind of megaphone. The sound echoed across the water and seemed to vibrate in my chest. It lasted for maybe 2 seconds, then stopped. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing, just dead silence. My oldest son, Jake, looked at me with wide eyes. "Dad, what was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, it happened again. Same gravelly scream, same impossible volume, then silence for maybe 5 seconds, and then a third scream. 3 screams in total, each lasting about 2 seconds, with these brief pauses between them. I'm not exaggerating when I say this wasn't normal. Whatever made that sound had to have lungs several times larger than a human's. The power behind it was unlike anything I've heard from known wildlife. I immediately gathered the boys and our gear, trying to stay calm so they wouldn't panic. We left the fishing poles half-packed and practically jogged back to the truck. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. The boys were quiet, which wasn't like them at all. In the truck, my youngest finally asked, "Was that a bear, Dad?" I didn't want to scare them, but I didn't want to lie either. "I don't know what it was, buddy. I've never heard anything like that before." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that sound. It wasn't just the volume or the gravelly quality, it was how deliberate it seemed. 3 distinct screams with pauses in between, almost like communication. I decided I needed to go back and look around, not just for my peace of mind, but because part of me needed to know what had made that sound. I didn't tell my wife. She would have thought I was crazy. I just said I was going fishing again early the next morning. I got to the pond right at sunrise. The morning was cool and misty, with that grey light that makes everything look a bit unreal. I brought my rifle this time, which I don't normally do on fishing trips. I felt a bit foolish, but also not foolish enough to leave it behind. I started by examining the area around the pond where we'd been fishing. Nothing seemed disturbed. Then I headed east, toward where the screams had come from. The forest was dense there, with tall pines and thick undergrowth. I had to push through ferns and berry bushes, getting soaked from the morning dew. About 200 yards in, roughly where I estimated the screams had come from, I found something that made me stop cold. A line of tracks. Big tracks. Not just big, enormous. I've tracked deer, elk, bear, and mountain lion. I know what their prints look like. These weren't anything I recognized. They were roughly oval-shaped, about 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made them was very heavy. The tracks formed a straight line, about 20 of them, heading north through the forest. They were old, maybe 2 weeks based on how the edges had dried and crumbled. Too worn to show details like toes or other features, but the size and pattern were unmistakable. These weren't made by any animal I knew. I took some measurements using my hunting knife for scale. It's exactly 6 inches long when closed. I didn't have a camera with me. This was 1994. We didn't carry phones with cameras everywhere. I regret that now. I should have come back with a camera, but something about those tracks and the memory of that scream made me uneasy about returning. What bothered me most was the stride length. The distance between each track was around 4 feet. That's a huge step, much longer than mine, and I'm 6'2". Whatever made these tracks was tall, very tall. Standing there alone in the forest, looking at those tracks, I suddenly felt exposed, like I was being watched. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just silence. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that when the forest goes silent, it usually means there's a predator nearby. I didn't stay much longer after that. I marked the location as best I could and headed back to my truck. The whole time, I kept feeling like something was following me just out of sight. I never heard anything or saw movement, but the feeling was overwhelming. This wasn't the first strange thing to happen in that area either. Back in 1990, my parents were driving near Lake Fork Ranch, about 15 miles from the beaver pond. They saw what they described as a large, black, furry creature cross the road about 50 yards ahead of them. My dad estimated it was 7 or 8 feet tall, walking upright. He's a practical man, not given to exaggeration or flights of fancy. When they told me about it, I could tell they were genuinely shaken. A week after their sighting, they found an 18-inch footprint near their cabin. This one was fresher and showed clear toe impressions. 5 of them, arranged much like a human foot, but wider and larger. They didn't take a photo or make a cast, something my dad still regrets. Then, in 1991, my cousin Tom was camping in his RV near the same area. In the middle of the night, something started rocking his RV violently. He thought at first it was a bear, but when he shined his flashlight out the window, he didn't see anything. The next morning, a box of apples he'd left on the picnic table was gone. Not scattered around like a bear would have done, completely gone. In 1995, a year after our incident, some campers at Lake Fork Campground reported something similar. Something shook their camper in the middle of the night, enough to wake them up, terrified. They heard heavy footsteps circling the camper several times before whatever it was moved off into the forest. I've tried to make sense of what we experienced that day at the beaver pond. The scientific part of my brain wants to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of injury that made its vocalizations strange. Maybe the tracks were from a particularly large elk or moose, distorted by rain or mud. But deep down, I know better. I know what bear tracks look like. I know what elk tracks look like. These were something else entirely. As for the scream, I've listened to recordings of every animal native to Colorado. Nothing comes close. The volume alone would require lungs far larger than any known wildlife in the area, and the deliberate pattern, 3 distinct screams with pauses, that's what keeps me up at night sometimes. I never told many people about this. My wife knows, And my sons remember it, of course. A few close hunting buddies have heard the story after enough beers around a campfire. Most give me that look, the one that says they think I'm exaggerating or misremembering. We still fish at that beaver pond sometimes. The boys are grown now, with kids of their own. We've never heard the scream again, never found more tracks. But every time we're there, I catch myself glancing toward the eastern forest, listening a little too carefully to the sounds around us. I don't know what we heard that day. I don't know what made those tracks. But I do know that there are things in the wilderness that defy easy explanation. Things that remind us that for all our knowledge and technology, there are still mysteries in the world. That scream has stayed with me for over 25 years now. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I swear I can still feel it vibrating in my chest. And sometimes when the forest goes quiet and that feeling of being watched creeps up my spine, I wonder if whatever made that sound is still out there, watching and waiting. Whatever it was, I hope I never encounter it face to face. The sound alone was terrifying enough. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. This is Story 4. I've debated whether to share this for years. Only a handful of people know what happened to me that day, back in July 1992, and most of them think I'm either lying or that I hallucinated the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I've been carrying this around for too long, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here will actually believe me. I was 42 at the time, and fishing was pretty much my religion. I'd been hitting the Columbia River in Washington for sturgeon since I was a teenager. My dad taught me all the spots, all the tricks. By 92, I'd been fishing that stretch for nearly 30 years, knew it like the back of my hand. Never felt scared or uncomfortable out there. It was my second home. That evening in July started like any other. Weather was perfect. Warm but not hot, light breeze, clear skies. I'd taken the day off work to get some time alone on the river. My marriage was going through a rough patch back then, and fishing was my escape. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I set up my gear around 6 in the evening. The first couple hours were productive. I caught a few smaller fish, nothing worth keeping, but it felt good just being out there. The sun was starting to set, creating that golden light on the water that makes everything look magical. I remember checking my watch. It was just past 8, and I was thinking about giving it another hour before heading back. That's when I first noticed something was off. The normal evening sounds, birds, frogs, insects, just stopped, like someone had hit the mute button on nature. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a hawk or something was nearby, I figured, but as the silence stretched on, this uncomfortable feeling started creeping up my spine. I've spent enough time outdoors to know when something isn't right. When animals go quiet, there's usually a reason. Still, I kept fishing, told myself I was being paranoid. The light was fading fast, but I had a small lantern with me, and I wasn't ready to leave yet. I'd just cast out a fresh line with some heavy tackle, hoping to land one decent-sized sturgeon before calling it quits. About 20 minutes into this weird silence, I felt a solid hit on my line, not just a nibble. This was the real deal. My rod bent hard, and I knew immediately I had a big one. The drag started singing as whatever was on the other end pulled with serious force. Had to be a sturgeon, and a good-sized one at that. My heart was racing, hands steady, but tense as I worked the fish. Anyone who's fought a big sturgeon knows they don't come in easy. This one was putting up a hell of a fight, and I was focused entirely on not losing it. Based on the pull, I was guessing at least 3, maybe 4 feet long. Would have been my biggest catch of the season. I was so caught up in the battle that I almost missed the movement downstream. Something caught my eye, maybe 30 yards away, a dark shape moving along the bank. At first, I thought it might be another fisherman, though it seemed odd anyone would be approaching from that direction. There was no trail there, just thick brush and trees. As I divided my attention between my bending rod and this shape, I realized whatever was moving was way too big to be a person, and it wasn't moving like a bear or any animal I recognized. It was upright, completely upright, The sturgeon was thrashing in the shallows now, close enough to see its pale belly flashing in the dying light. I should have been excited, focused on landing my prize. Instead, I couldn't take my eyes off this thing as it moved purposefully toward the water, toward my fish. God, I'll never forget what I saw next. This massive creature, I can only describe it as a Sasquatch, strode right up to the edge of the river where my sturgeon was fighting. It moved with this strange confidence, like it had done this 1,000 times before. Its body was covered in dark brown hair, not like a bear's fur, but more like a shaggy coat. The shoulders were impossibly wide, arms longer than any human's should be, hanging down past where knees would be. Without hesitation, it crouched down at the water's edge. I was frozen, rod still in my hands, but forgotten. The creature plunged one arm into the shallows, and in a single fluid motion, grabbed my sturgeon, just reached in and seized it like it was nothing. The force when it yanked the fish free almost pulled the rod from my grip. I felt the line snap, heard the whip crack sound as my test line gave way. The creature stood back up to its full height, towering, massive, at least 7 feet tall, but probably more. Water cascaded off its arm as it held my fish in one enormous hand. Then it made this sound, a short, deep grunt that seemed to vibrate the air between us. Not aggressive, more like satisfaction. The thing didn't seem scared or even surprised by my presence. It was focused on the sturgeon, which looked tiny in its grip even though the fish had to be over 3 feet long. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The creature adjusted its grip on the fish, and that's when I saw its hand clearly, massive, with fingers that completely wrapped around the sturgeon's body. Not like a human hand, bigger, stronger. The proportions were all wrong. For just a moment, couldn't have been more than a second, it turned its head and looked directly at me. Our eyes met across that short distance, and what I saw wasn't animal at all. Those eyes, dark and reflective in the fading light, but unmistakably intelligent, calculating, aware. It was studying me, evaluating whether I was a threat. That look is what still haunts me. Not the size, not the strength, but those eyes. It knew exactly what it was doing. It knew exactly what I was. And it had decided I wasn't worth worrying about. Without any aggression or hurry, it simply turned away, the sturgeon still firmly in its grip, and walked into the tree line. Its stride was long and fluid, covering ground quickly without seeming to rush. And then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness under the trees. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The fishing rod in my hand suddenly seemed absurd, like a child's toy. I realized I was trembling, my legs barely holding me up. The silence around me was oppressive, pressing in on my ears. I packed up faster than I ever had before, fumbling with my gear, dropping things, constantly looking over my shoulder. The walk back to my truck was the longest of my life. Every snapped twig made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept imagining those eyes watching me from the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Just sat in my living room with all the lights on, a beer in my hand that went warm because I forgot to drink it. My wife thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. The next morning, against every instinct telling me to stay away, I went back. I had to know if I'd imagined it all. The day was bright and normal, birds singing, insects buzzing, nothing like the unnatural silence of the evening before. I found the spot where I'd been standing, then walked downstream to where I'd seen the creature. The ground near the water's edge was soft mud, and there they were, impressions in the earth that made my stomach drop. One clear footprint stood out, pressed several inches deep into the mud. It was huge, showing thick, rounded toes that no human or known animal would leave. I didn't have a camera with me. This was 1992, remember? And by the time I thought to come back with one, rain had washed everything away. That was 30 years ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I avoided fishing alone on that stretch of river for years afterward. Even now, I don't stay past sunset. Some people I've told think it was a bear standing on its hind legs, or maybe some guy in a suit playing a prank. But they didn't see those eyes. They didn't feel that moment of connection, that unmistakable intelligence. What bothers me most, even now, isn't that these creatures might exist. It's that this one looked at me like I was just another feature of the landscape. Like humans aren't the apex predators we think we are. There was no fear in those eyes, no concern, just a brief assessment before dismissing me as irrelevant. I still fish the Columbia, still love it out there, but I'm never truly alone on that river anymore. Those eyes are always with me, watching from the tree line, reminding me how little we really know about the wilderness we think we've conquered. Story 5. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It happened back in 2016, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This isn't some campfire story or something I made up for attention. I wish it was. I've been an avid canoeist for most of my adult life. There's something about being out on the water that just centers me, you know? The quiet, the rhythm of paddling, watching the shoreline drift by. It's my happy place. Or at least it was until that trip to the Spanish River. My buddy and I had been planning this trip for months. We're both experienced outdoorsmen, not the type to get spooked easily. The Spanish River in northern Ontario is pretty remote. That was the appeal. We wanted to get away from everything. Maybe catch some fish, drink a few beers around the campfire, and just disconnect from the world for a bit. It was late August. The days were still warm, but the nights were getting cooler. Perfect canoeing weather. We had plotted our route carefully, planning a 5-day trip through a particularly isolated section of the river. We'd done our homework, read trip reports, studied maps, packed all the right gear. We were prepared, or so we thought. The first 2 days were everything we'd hoped for. Clear skies, calm water, incredible scenery. The boreal forest in that area is dense, tall spruce and pine trees right up to the water's edge in most spots. We saw plenty of wildlife, a couple of moose, beavers, even a black bear fishing on the shoreline that quickly took off when it spotted us. We camped on sandy beaches both nights, had great meals, and slept like logs. Just two guys enjoying nature at its finest. The third day is when everything changed. We got an early start, breaking camp around 7 in the morning. The river was like glass, and there was a light mist hanging over the water that burned off as the sun climbed higher. We'd been paddling for maybe 2 hours when I first noticed something odd. There was a cracking sound from the left bank, like a large branch breaking. Not unusual in the forest, but it was followed by another crack and then another. Something was moving parallel to us in the tree line. "You hear that?" I asked. My buddy nodded. "Probably just a moose." That made sense. Moose are common up there, and they're big enough to make that kind of noise. We kept paddling, but I kept glancing over at the shoreline. The forest was thick, and I couldn't see more than a few yards in. But I had this feeling like we were being watched. The sounds continued, keeping pace with our canoe. Crack, snap, sometimes a thump, like something heavy stepping on the forest floor. Whatever it was big, and it seemed to be following us. "That's one persistent moose," my buddy said, but I could hear the slight tension in his voice. About 20 minutes later, the sound stopped, and I started to relax a bit. Maybe it was just a curious animal that had finally lost interest. We continued downstream, rounding a gentle bend in the river. That's when we saw it. A large spruce tree had fallen partway into the river. Not an uncommon sight. Trees fall into rivers all the time. It was jutting out about 15 feet into the water, and we'd need to paddle around it. No big deal. As we approached, I noticed the tree looked freshly fallen. The exposed wood was pale and raw, not weathered. The roots were partially torn out of the ground, with soil still clinging to them. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. We were about 30 yards from the fallen tree when I heard a deep guttural grunt from the shoreline. Not a sound I'd ever heard any animal make before. It sent a chill up my spine. "What the hell was that?" my buddy whispered. Before I could answer, the impossible happened. The entire spruce tree, I'm talking about a massive trunk at least 2 feet thick at the base, suddenly lurched forward. It moved with tremendous force, like it had been violently shoved or pulled. The tree plunged deeper into the water, sending up a huge splash directly in our path. A wave rippled out toward us, rocking our canoe violently. I dropped my paddle and grabbed both gunwales to steady us. For a terrifying second, I thought we were going to flip. "Holy shit!" my buddy yelled, his paddle raised above the water. That's when I saw it. Through a small gap in the underbrush just above where the tree had moved, I caught a glimpse of something. The sighting lasted maybe 2 seconds, but the image is burned into my memory. It was massive, well over 8 feet tall, with shoulders that must have been at least 3 feet across. The body was thick and powerful, covered in dark brown hair that looked matted in places. What hit me hardest was the proportions, all wrong for any animal I knew. The head sat low on those massive shoulders like there was barely any neck at all. The arms were unnaturally long, hanging well below where a human's would end. The legs were like tree trunks, thick and powerful. I only saw it from the side and not clearly through the brush, but what I did see was enough. This was no bear, no moose, nothing I could rationalize away. "Did you see that?" I hissed, my voice barely working. My buddy just nodded, his face pale. "Go now." We didn't need to discuss it further. We dug our paddles into the water and made for the opposite shore as fast as we could. There was a small gravel bar about 50 yards downstream on the right side of the river, and we headed straight for it. The entire time, I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing swimming after us or appearing on the shoreline. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We beached the canoe on the gravel and scrambled out, nearly tripping over each other. We stood there, scanning the far shoreline, barely breathing. "What the fuck was that?" my buddy finally said, his voice shaking. I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A bear on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong. A man in a suit, in the middle of nowhere. Who could move a tree that size? The fallen spruce had to weigh hundreds, maybe thousands of pounds. No human could have moved it like that. No bear or moose either. And the timing, it had been deliberately placed in our path. The moment we approached, it was shoved further into the water, nearly capsizing us. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. We stood on that gravel bar for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The opposite shore remained still and silent. No movement, no sounds, but the feeling of being watched never faded. "We need to get out of here," my buddy said. "Back upstream or downstream." Going back upstream would mean paddling against the current, which would be slower. Going downstream would take us past whatever that thing was. Neither option felt great. Downstream, I finally decided. We'll stay on this side of the river and paddle like hell past that spot, and that's what we did. We launched the canoe and paddled faster than I've ever paddled in my life. As we passed the fallen tree, now jutting even further into the river, I couldn't help staring at the shoreline. The forest was dense and dark, revealing nothing. We didn't stop paddling until we'd gone at least a mile downstream. My arms were burning, and I was drenched in sweat that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. We eventually found a small island in the middle of the river and decided to make camp there rather than on the shoreline. Neither of us said much as we set up the tent. We didn't build a fire that night. Something about staying as inconspicuous as possible felt important. Sleep was out of the question. We sat with our backs against each other, taking turns watching the shoreline on both sides of the river. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me flinch. "You think it was a Sasquatch?" my buddy finally asked around 3 in the morning. I'd been avoiding that word, even in my thoughts. Saying it out loud made it real. I don't know what else it could have been, I admitted. The size, the strength to move that tree. I've been in the woods my whole life and never seen anything like it. It was trying to stop us, he said quietly, or trap us. That tree was placed deliberately. That thought had been nagging at me too. The precision of it, the timing. This wasn't a random encounter. It was an intelligent action meant to block our path or possibly capsize us. We completed our trip the next 2 days, but we changed our route to avoid that section of river on the way back. We paddled longer days than planned, wanting to get back to civilization as quickly as possible. We talked about reporting what we'd seen, but to who? The local ranger station, the police. What would we say? We think a Bigfoot tried to attack us by pushing a tree into our path. We'd sound insane, so we kept it to ourselves. Until now, I've only told a handful of people, close friends who wouldn't judge. Some believe me, some don't. I don't blame the skeptics. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't experienced it myself. It's been 7 years now. I've gone back to Canoe, other rivers, but I've never returned to that section of the Spanish. Sometimes I convince myself it was just a bear, or that the tree fell naturally and my mind played tricks on me. But then I remember the deliberate movement of that massive trunk, the glimpse of that enormous figure, and I know what I saw. Whatever it was, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Wendigo, or something else entirely, it was intelligent enough to perceive us as intruders and take action to intimidate us, and it worked. To this day, I get a chill when I'm in dense forest and hear branches breaking in the distance. The most terrifying part? I'm convinced we weren't the first paddlers it's encountered, and we won't be the last. Sometimes I think about warning people about that stretch of river, but what would I say? How do you warn someone about something most people don't believe exists? All I know is that something was out there that day. Something big enough and strong enough to move a tree that would take a machine to budge. Something intelligent enough to time it perfectly to block our path, and something territorial enough to want us gone from its river. I used to think the wilderness was just empty space between cities. Now I know better. Sometimes, when you're out there thinking you're alone, you're actually being watched, and not by anything in our field guides. Story 6. I still can't believe what happened to us camping near Steelville that summer. It's been over 40 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. This was back in '82, when my family and I used to go camping along the Merrimack River every summer. Beautiful area, lots of trees, clear water for swimming and fishing, perfect place to get away from the city for a while. We had this spot we'd been going to for years. This older lady's farm, where she let people camp. Nothing fancy, just a few cleared areas for tents, a fire pit at each site, and an outhouse. She had maybe 5 campsites total, and we always tried to get the one at the far end because it gave us more privacy. This particular spot backed right up to where the woods got really thick. There was this narrow dirt road that disappeared into the trees right by our camp, probably an old logging road or something. This was our 3rd day at the campsite. The weather had been perfect, not too hot, clear skies. My 7-year-old son had been having a blast, catching frogs and building little dams in the shallow part of the river. My wife and I had brought along one of my buddies who'd never been camping in the area before. He's a big guy, about 6'2", and he'd been showing my son how to whittle sticks with a pocket knife. That afternoon, my friend and I headed out to gather some firewood for the evening. My wife was sitting at our picnic table reading, and my son was playing maybe 20 feet away at the start of that dirt road. He had a little collection of sticks and rocks he was organizing into piles, the kind of thing kids do to keep themselves entertained. I wasn't gone more than 15 minutes. We were just walking back to camp with our arms full of wood when I heard my son screaming. Not like a play scream, but real terror. My heart dropped instantly. Every parent knows that sound, when your kid is genuinely scared. I dropped all the wood and ran toward camp. By the time I got there, my son was in my wife's lap, shaking uncontrollably. His face was pale, and he had this wild-eyed look I'd never seen before. My wife was trying to calm him down, but he kept saying, the big man, over and over. What happened? I asked my wife. She looked confused. I don't know. I don't. He was just playing, and then he suddenly jumped up and ran to me, screaming about seeing someone. I knelt down beside them. Hey, buddy, what's wrong? What big man? He was trembling so hard he could barely speak. In the trees, he pointed toward the dirt road. A really tall man, taller than your friend. He looked up at my buddy who had caught up with me, but he didn't have clothes on. My friend and I exchanged looks. My first thought was, some pervert was hanging around the campground. My son was still struggling to explain. He was all covered in black hair, all over, even his face, and he was watching me. A chill ran through me. My wife held him tighter. Maybe it was a bear, she suggested, though we all knew there weren't supposed to be bears in this part of Missouri. It wasn't a bear, my son insisted. It was standing up like a person, but bigger. My friend pulled me aside. We should check it out, he said quietly. I nodded. We both had brought our handguns on this trip. Mine was a Ruger Blackhawk 44 that I kept in a lockbox in the tent. Not that I expected trouble, but I'd grown up hunting and felt more comfortable having it with us in the wilderness. My buddy had a similar .44 caliber revolver. We waited until my son calmed down a bit. He wouldn't leave my wife's side, and she decided to take him down to the river to watch the minnows, something that usually distracted him. Once they were settled, my friend and I grabbed our guns and headed toward the dirt road. It was starting to get dark by then. The sun was setting, and the woods were already in deep shadow. We walked slowly down the road, not saying much. I kept my hand on my gun the whole time. The road curved after about 100 yards and disappeared into denser forest. We didn't see any sign of a person. No footprints we could make out on the hard-packed dirt, no discarded items. But as we rounded that curve, we both noticed a smell. It's hard to describe exactly, but it was like something dead, mixed with wet fur, and this musky, skunk-like odor, strong enough that my friend covered his nose with his shirt. You smell that? I whispered. He nodded. What the hell is it? We stood there for a minute listening. The woods were quieter than they should have been. Usually you'd hear birds, squirrels, all kinds of critters making noise, but there was nothing. Just this heavy silence that made the hair on my neck stand up. The light was fading fast, and neither of us was eager to go deeper into the woods in the dark. We turned back toward camp, walking faster than we had on the way in. When we got back, my son was still clingy and quiet. He wouldn't go near the edge of our campsite and kept looking nervously toward the woods. It was strange to see him like this. He was usually such a fearless kid, always the first to explore a new trail or wade into the river. That night after dinner, there was supposed to be a meteor shower. We'd planned to watch it from this pasture near the campground where the view was clear. My son didn't want to go at first, but we convinced him it would be safe because we'd all be together and we'd stay in the open field. So around 10 o'clock, we walked to this pasture with our blankets and laid them out. The sky was incredible. No light pollution, just millions of stars and meteors streaking across every few minutes. My son had finally started to relax a little, pointing excitedly when he spotted a particularly bright shooting star. We'd been there maybe half an hour when we heard it. From the woods that bordered the eastern edge of the pasture came a sound of movement. At first, I thought it might be a deer or maybe even a wild hog. But this was different. It sounded like footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps that no animal would make. Then we heard branches snapping, not little twigs, but substantial limbs breaking with loud cracks that echoed across the field. It sounded like gunshots. Snap, snap! Whatever was moving through those woods was big and wasn't trying to be quiet. My son scrambled into my wife's arms again. It's him. he whispered. The big man. My friend and I both stood up. We had our guns with us. There was no way we were going anywhere without them after what happened earlier. But even armed, neither of us suggested going to investigate. Something felt very wrong. This wasn't a person moving through those woods. No hiker would be crashing through dense brush in the pitch dark. The sounds continued for maybe 5 minutes, moving parallel to the field, always staying just inside the tree line where we couldn't see. Then they faded, as whatever it was moved deeper into the forest. We didn't stay to finish watching the meteor shower. We gathered our blankets and hustled back to the campsite. None of us slept well that night. My son insisted on being in the middle of our tent, between my wife and me. Every little sound outside made us tense up. The next morning, my friend and I went to check out the woods beside the pasture. In the daylight, it didn't seem so intimidating, but what we found made my skin crawl. There was a clear trail pushed through the underbrush, saplings bent and broken, branches snapped off much higher than a deer could reach. Something big had forced its way through there. And the strange thing was, the trail didn't follow any existing path. It cut straight through the densest part of the brush, where no person would choose to walk if they had an alternative. When we got back to camp, I noticed something else odd. The property owner, this sweet older lady who'd always sit on her porch waving to the campers as they went by, now had a 12-gauge shotgun across her lap. I'd been coming to her place for years and had never seen her with a gun before. When we walked past, I nodded to her and commented on what a nice day it was. Sure is, she replied, her hand resting on that shotgun. She didn't offer any explanation for the weapon, and I didn't ask. Later that day, I casually mentioned to her that my son had been scared by something he'd seen in the woods. I was careful not to sound crazy, just said he thought he saw a tall figure by the dirt road. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Woods can play tricks on your eyes." But the way she gripped that shotgun told me she wasn't being entirely truthful. We stayed one more night because we'd paid for 3. But none of us wandered far from the campsite. My son refused to go anywhere near that dirt road again. We kept the campfire burning bright all evening and turned in early. The next morning, we packed up faster than we ever had before. As we were pulling out, I noticed the old lady was still on her porch, shotgun at her side, watching the edge of the woods. We never went back to that campground, found another spot further downstream for our trips in later years. My son is a grown man now with kids of his own, but to this day, he won't go camping in heavily wooded areas. Says he gets panic attacks if he can't see open sky in all directions. I've read about Bigfoot sightings in Missouri over the years. Most people laugh them off, and I used to be one of them. But when I think about my son's face that day, the pure terror in his eyes, the way he described what he saw, and then those sounds in the woods, the broken trail we found, I don't laugh anymore. Whatever was watching my son from those trees wasn't a bear or a man in costume, and that old lady with her shotgun, she knew something. She'd seen it before, I'm certain of it. I still wonder what would have happened if we'd gone deeper into those woods that evening. Sometimes I think we were very lucky to have made it out of there with nothing worse than a scary story to tell. Story 7. I've been sitting on this experience for over 20 years now. It happened in September 2002, and I've never been able to fully explain what I encountered that night. I'm not someone who believes in monsters or gets spooked easily. I've been hiking solo since I was 19, and I've had my fair share of wildlife encounters, bears, coyotes, even a mountain lion once from a distance. But what happened in the Shasta Trinity forest that night was different. It shook me to my core, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I had taken a few days off work to go hiking in Northern California. The Shasta Trinity National Forest was beautiful that time of year. Not too hot, not too cold, and the changing colors were just starting to show. I'd picked a trail that was supposed to take about 5 hours round trip. Nothing too challenging, but with some decent elevation and great viewpoints. I started around noon, later than I'd planned. I had a small day pack with water, some energy bars, a light jacket, my camera and a flashlight, just in case, though I never expected to need it. I always carried a flashlight on hikes, even day hikes. My dad drilled that into me. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Thank God I listened to him. The hike itself was great. Perfect weather, around 65 degrees with a slight breeze. The trail wound through some dense forest sections and opened up to these incredible vistas of mountains stretching forever. I stopped a bunch of times to take photos, climbed some rock formations off-trail to get better views, and just sat for a while at the summit, soaking it all in. That's where I screwed up. I completely lost track of time sitting up there, watching clouds cast shadows across the valley below. By the time I checked my watch, it was already past 5 in the evening. Sunset was around 7:30 that time of year, which meant I had less than 2 hours to make it back to my car before dark. I started heading down at a quicker pace than I'd come up. The trail was well marked, but parts of it were pretty rocky and required careful footing. About an hour into my return, the forest was getting noticeably darker. The trees were thick in this section, and even though the sun hadn't fully set yet, the shadows were growing longer by the minute. By 6:45, I knew I wasn't going to make it back before dark. The trail still had about 3 miles to go. I pulled out my flashlight and tested it. Thankfully, the batteries were strong. I kept moving, trying to maintain a good pace without risking a fall. That's when I first noticed something was off. The forest had gotten quiet. That deep silence that feels wrong somehow. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just the sound of my boots on the trail and my breathing. Then I heard it, a crack of a branch somewhere behind me. I stopped and listened. Nothing. I figured it was probably just a fallen branch or maybe a deer. I kept walking, and a minute or two later, I heard what sounded like a footstep. A heavy footstep, not like a deer or smaller animal. I stopped again and turned around, pointing my flashlight back the way I'd come. The beam cut through the darkness between the trees, but there was nothing there. I called out, thinking maybe another hiker was on the trail. "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded small in the vast darkness. No response. I picked up my pace, trying to stay calm. The trail curved around a ridge, and as I rounded the bend, that's when I smelled it. The most pungent, awful smell hit me like a wall. It was like wet dog combined with rotting vegetation and something else, something musky and sour. I'd smelled bears before and they can stink, but this was different, more intense, more, I don't know, human somehow, but not human at all. My heart started racing. I heard another heavy footstep behind me, closer now. I spun around, swinging my flashlight wildly. The beam swept across the trees and then caught something. 2 eyes reflecting the light. They weren't at the height I expected. They were way higher than a person's head would be, maybe 7 or 8 feet off the ground, and they were set wider apart than human eyes. The reflection was reddish yellow, like nothing I'd ever seen. I froze completely. My hand was shaking, making the flashlight beam jitter, but I managed to steady it enough to illuminate more of whatever was standing there. What I saw in that moment is burned into my memory forever. It had a massive, broad head with a heavy brow that shadowed those reflecting eyes. Below them was a wide, flat nose, not protruding like a human nose, but more spread out. Its mouth was a straight line, lips pressed together tightly. The face was partially covered with thick, dark hair that hung unevenly across its cheeks and down its jaw. Not fur like an animal, but hair, like a person's hair, but coarser, wilder. The thing was about 20 feet away from me, close enough that when it exhaled I could hear the air pushing through its nostrils. Then it made a sound, this low, rumbling noise that I didn't just hear, I felt it vibrate in my chest and stomach. It wasn't a growl exactly, more like a deep, warning hum. I took an instinctive step backward, and when I did, the creature leaned forward slightly, like it was studying my reaction. I could see massive shoulders now, covered in the same dark hair, silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky behind it. It had to be at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe taller. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand upright that naturally for that long, and the face was all wrong. It wasn't a person in a suit. The proportions were impossible, and the movement was too fluid, too natural. This was something else entirely. I knew running would be a mistake. Whatever this thing was, it could outrun me in seconds if it wanted to. So I started backing away slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed at it, but not directly in its eyes. I didn't want to challenge or threaten it. After backing up about 10 feet, I turned around and started walking away at a steady pace. Every fiber of my being wanted to sprint, but I forced myself to walk normally, fighting against the panic rising in my chest. Behind me, I heard it start to move, heavy footsteps, not rushing but keeping pace, following me through the trees. Sometimes the sound would fade, as if it had moved deeper into the forest, paralleling my path. Then it would get louder again as it approached the trail. The smell would come and go with the breeze, sometimes so strong I had to fight the urge to gag, then fading until just a hint of it remained. But I knew it was still there, watching, following. This went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes or so. I kept walking, heart pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. The darkness between the trees seemed alive now, shifting and moving with each sweep of my flashlight. I checked my watch, 8:20. I'd been walking for almost 2 hours since sunset. According to my mental map, I should be getting close to the trailhead and parking area. The thought gave me a small surge of hope. Then suddenly the footsteps behind me picked up pace. They were getting faster, closer. I could hear branches snapping as it moved through the undergrowth parallel to the trail. The musky smell grew overwhelmingly strong. It was moving toward me. I broke into a brisk walk, not quite running, but moving as fast as I could without stumbling in the darkness. My flashlight beam bounced wildly across the trail ahead. Behind me, the footsteps were almost at a run now. Then, through a break in the trees ahead, I saw it. The reflection of my car's license plate catching the flashlight beam. The parking lot. I was almost there. I started running then, no longer caring if it triggered a chase. The footsteps behind me quickened too, heavy thuds shaking the ground. I swear I could feel its breath on my neck, hot and damp against my skin. I burst out of the tree line into the small gravel parking area, gasping for air, and ran straight to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, locked all the doors, and started the engine in one frantic motion. Only then did I look back toward the trail I'd just emerged from. My headlights illuminated the first few yards of the path and the trees on either side. Nothing moved in that harsh white light. The forest edge was still, silent. I sat there for several minutes, engine running, trying to calm my breathing enough to drive. I kept looking at the tree line, waiting for it to emerge, but nothing came. Eventually, I put the car in gear and drove away, checking my rearview mirror obsessively until I reached the main road. I've spent years trying to rationalize what I saw that night. Could it have been a bear? No, the face was all wrong, and it moved on 2 legs the entire time. A person playing a prank? Impossible. No human could be that tall with those proportions, and no one could fake that smell or those sounds. I know what I saw. I saw a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. It was real. It was intelligent, and it could have caught me at any point if it wanted to. For some reason, it didn't. It just escorted me off its territory, making sure I left. I've never hiked alone since that day. I've never returned to the Shasta Trinity Forest, and I've never been able to forget those eyes reflecting in my flashlight beam, or that face. Too human to be an animal, too wild to be a man. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I can smell that musky odor in my bedroom, and I have to turn on all the lights to convince myself I'm alone. because the most terrifying part isn't just what I saw, it's knowing that it's out there, watching from the trees, and most people have no idea. I don't know why I'm sharing this now after all these years. Maybe I just need someone to believe me, but I know what I experienced, and I know that if that creature had wanted to hurt me that night, I never would have made it back to my car. Story 8. I've sat on this experience for over a decade now. I never thought I'd share it with anyone besides my closest friends, who already think I'm crazy. But after reading some of your stories, I realize I'm not alone in what I saw. This happened in October 2012, and I still get chills thinking about it. I live on a small property just outside Mountain View, Arkansas. It's nothing fancy, just a modest house with a few acres that back up to dense woods. The Ozarks are beautiful, especially in fall when the leaves change. I've always loved living on the edge of wilderness, or at least I did until that evening. It was around dusk, maybe 6:30 or 7. The sky had that deep orange-purple glow. It gets right before dark. I remember I'd been putting off checking my fence line for a few days. A couple of my neighbor's cows had wandered onto my property the previous week, and I wanted to make sure there weren't any weak spots they could push through again. I grabbed my flashlight even though it wasn't quite dark enough to need it yet. Force of habit, I guess. The air was crisp. That perfect October temperature where you need just a light jacket. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I walked the perimeter of my property. When I reached the section that runs along the woods, something felt wrong. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Complete silence. If you've spent any time in the country, you know the woods are never truly quiet. There's always something. Birds, insects, leaves rustling, distant animals. But this was different. Everything had gone still, like nature was holding its breath. I stopped walking and just listened, my skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with the temperature. I've lived here long enough to know that when the forest goes silent, it usually means a predator is nearby, typically a coyote or maybe a black bear passing through. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming from inside the tree line. At first, I told myself it was a deer, but deer don't make the ground vibrate when they walk. Each step had weight behind it, a dull thud I could feel through my boots. Whatever was walking through those woods was massive. I stood frozen, staring at the tree line about 50 yards away. My flashlight suddenly felt useless in my hand. The footsteps stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, there was absolute silence again. Then the branches at the edge of the woods parted, and something stepped out into my yard. Even in the fading light, I could see it clearly. And what I saw, I still struggle to put into words. It was enormous, taller than any human I've ever seen. Had to be over 7 feet, maybe even 8. But it wasn't just the height. This thing was broad, shoulders like a linebacker, but twice as wide. Its body was thick, solid muscle under dark hair that covered it completely. Not fur exactly, more like coarse hair, dark brown or black in the dim light. Its arms hung down way too low, almost to its knees, ending in hands that looked big enough to palm a basketball easily. The head sat directly on those massive shoulders, no real neck to speak of, with a thick, prominent brow that shadowed its face. The nose was flat and wide, and though I couldn't make out its eyes clearly, I could feel it looking directly at me. I couldn't move. My body just shut down. I've been scared before, had a close call with a bull once, nearly drove off a mountain road in winter. But this was different. This was primal fear, like my brain had switched to some ancient survival mode where even breathing seemed dangerous. The creature, and I know how this sounds, but it was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, seemed to survey the yard for a moment. Then it started walking, not toward me, thank God, but toward my fence line. Each step was deliberate, heavy. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly what it was doing. When it reached the fence about 30 feet from where I stood, it stopped. The fence isn't anything special, just wooden posts every 8 feet or so with wire strung between them. It came up to about the creature's waist. What happened next still plays in my mind constantly. The thing reached down and grabbed one of the wooden posts with a single massive hand. I could hear the wood creak from where I stood. With one powerful pull, it yanked the post partly out of the ground. Then it adjusted its grip, and with another yank, the post came completely free. Just like that, a post I had to use a post hole digger and tamp down firmly was pulled out like it was stuck in sand. That's when the smell hit me, a strong, musky, foul odor that made my stomach turn, like wet dog, rotting meat, and something else I can't even describe. It was so powerful I could taste it. The creature grunted, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Then it grabbed the wire fencing and jerked it hard. The staples that held the wire to the posts popped loose, pinging as they flew. The wire itself, thick gauge that's meant to keep cattle in, stretched and twisted in its grip. I should have run. I should have done something. But I just stood there watching as this thing systematically destroyed my fence. It moved to the next section, ripping down another post, then another. Wood cracked and splintered, wire snapped with sharp metallic pings. All the while, it kept making these deep grunting sounds, almost like it was annoyed by the fence being there. In less than a minute, it had destroyed 3 full sections of fence, about 24 feet worth. Posts pulled from the ground, wire mangled and twisted. It was like watching someone tear through tissue paper. That's how effortless it seemed. After the 3rd section, it stopped and looked around the yard again. I swear it looked right at me, but it didn't approach. Instead, it stepped over the destroyed fence, the remains not even reaching its knees, and started walking across my pasture toward the far tree line. I watched it go, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The creature moved quickly for its size, covering ground with long strides. Its arms swung at its sides, those huge hands occasionally brushing against tall grass. When it reached the far trees, it disappeared into them without looking back, branches closing behind it like it had never been there. Only then did I realize I'd been holding my breath. My legs felt like jelly, and when I finally tried to move, I nearly collapsed. I stumbled back toward my house, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every shadow, every movement in the corner of my eye made me jump. When I finally reached my back door, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to get inside. I locked every door, closed every blind, and sat in my living room with all the lights on, a shotgun across my lap. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I'd doze off for a few minutes, then jerk awake, convinced I heard those heavy footsteps on my porch. The smell lingered in my nostrils, even though I was nowhere near it anymore. Morning came, eventually. When the sun was fully up, I forced myself to go back out there. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing, that it had all been some bizarre hallucination. But the fence was exactly as I remembered. 3 sections completely destroyed, posts pulled from the ground, wire mangled. I found footprints too, huge impressions in the soft earth near the fence line. They were over 15 inches long and deeply pressed into the ground. I tried to take pictures with my phone, but they didn't capture the scale properly. By the next day, rain had washed them away. I've spent the last 11 years trying to make sense of what happened. Why did it destroy my fence? Was it angry, territorial? Was it some kind of message? I've repaired the fence, of course, but I used metal posts this time. Not that I think they'd stop that thing if it came back, but it makes me feel slightly better. I don't go out to check the fence line at dusk anymore. I don't go into the woods behind my property at all, if I can help it. Sometimes at night, I still hear unusual sounds from the trees. Branches breaking that sound too thick to be normal wildlife. Heavy thuds that could be footsteps. The wildlife goes quiet sometimes for no reason I can see. I don't know what I saw that evening. I know what I think it was, but saying Bigfoot or Sasquatch out loud makes me sound crazy, All I know is that I saw something impossible tear down my fence like it was made of matchsticks. I saw muscles flex under dark hair on a body too big to be human. I smelled that unforgettable stench. I heard those grunts and the sound of wood breaking in hands that could have just as easily broken me. And sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, all I can see are those broad shoulders, those impossibly long arms, and those hands that tore through solid wood like paper. I'll never forget it as long as I live, and I'll never be able to explain it. Story 9. I never used to believe in the supernatural or cryptids. I was always the practical one in our group, the person who needed hard evidence. That changed last summer, on July 19th, 2014. I'm still struggling to process what happened that day, but I need to share it somewhere. Maybe writing it down will help make sense of it, or at least help me accept that it really happened. My friends and I had been planning a kayaking trip along the northern shore of Lake Superior for months. We're all from Thunder Bay, Ontario, and we'd grown up exploring the lakes and forests around us, but this particular stretch, near Pakaskwa National Park, was new territory for us. The weather forecast was perfect. Sunny, not too hot, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. We arrived at our launch point just after sunrise. The water was calm, almost like glass, reflecting the towering pines that lined the shoreline. We unloaded our kayaks, packed our supplies, water bottles, granola bars, sunscreen, the usual stuff, and pushed off around 8 in the morning. The plan was to spend the whole day exploring the shoreline, stopping for lunch on one of the small beaches, and getting back before sunset. For the first 2 hours, everything was perfect. We paddled at a relaxed pace, pointing out interesting rock formations and birds. The northern shore of Superior is incredibly beautiful, wild in a way that makes you feel small. The water is crystal clear, but so cold it would kill you in minutes if you fell in. The massive cliffs and dense forest give you this feeling that you're seeing the world as it was thousands of years ago, untouched. Around 10 in the morning, we rounded this small peninsula and entered a secluded bay. The water there was shallower, maybe 15 feet deep, and exceptionally clear. You could see straight to the bottom in some spots. We were talking about how perfect the place was, how we should stop there for lunch on the way back. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. In the shallows, maybe 30 yards away, was something massive, standing upright in the water. "Guys," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "Look over there." My paddle froze mid-stroke as I stared. It took a few seconds to register what I was seeing. A creature, absolutely enormous, standing in the water. It had to be over 8 feet tall. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Shoulders too broad, arms too long. Its entire body was covered in dark brown hair that clung wetly to its frame. The creature was fishing. I know how crazy that sounds, but there's no other way to describe it. It was standing perfectly still, then would suddenly plunge its long arms into the water with incredible speed, pulling out fish and tossing them onto the shore behind it. The precision and skill were remarkable. This wasn't random thrashing. This was practiced, deliberate hunting. We all stopped paddling at once, and I think our sudden stillness caught its attention. The creature froze mid-motion, a fish clutched in one massive hand. It turned toward us, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I've never felt smaller or more vulnerable than in that moment. The water suddenly felt like the most dangerous place to be. We were exposed, with nowhere to hide, nothing between us and this thing. Its face is what I remember most clearly. Not quite human, not quite animal. A flat, wide nose, a pronounced brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. And those eyes, dark, reflective and unmistakably intelligent. They locked onto us with an awareness that was chilling. This wasn't an animal reacting on instinct. It was studying us, assessing us. Time seemed to stop as we stared at each other. I couldn't tell you if it was 5 seconds or 50. My hands were shaking so badly I thought I might drop my paddle. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. While maintaining eye contact with us, it took the fish it had caught and slammed it against the water's surface. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed across the bay. Sharp, violent slaps against the still water. Then it hurled the fish toward shore with such force that I could hear it thud against the rocks. I knew instinctively that this was a message, a display of power, a warning, and then it vocalized. I struggled to describe the sound, somewhere between a growl and a roar, but with a depth that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. It wasn't particularly loud, but it carried across the water with perfect clarity. The sound seemed to bypass my ears and lodge directly in my chest, in the primitive part of my brain that recognizes danger before my conscious mind can process it. No one said a word. We didn't need to. As if choreographed, we all started paddling backward, keeping our eyes on the creature. My arms felt like jelly, and I was hyper-aware of every splash our paddles made. I was terrified that the sound would provoke it, that it would come after us. It didn't move from its spot, just watched us retreat. Once we'd backed up maybe 50 yards, we finally turned our kayaks around and paddled like our lives depended on it. No one spoke until we were completely out of the bay and around the peninsula. "Did that just happen?" one of my friends finally asked, his voice shaking. "Yes," I said. There was no question in my mind. That was real. We didn't end our trip. I'm still not sure why. Maybe shock, maybe denial, or maybe some stubborn determination not to let fear ruin our day. But we did alter our route. No more shallow coves. We stayed in deeper water, further from shore, and kept scanning the tree line as we paddled. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We talked about what we'd seen, trying to make sense of it. We all agreed on the details. The height, at least 8 feet. The appearance, covered in dark brown hair. The fishing behavior, methodical and skilled. And the intimidation display with the fish. None of us had ever believed in Bigfoot before, but we couldn't deny what we'd seen. "It knew exactly what it was doing," my friend said as we loaded our kayaks back onto the car late that afternoon. "The way it caught those fish, that wasn't luck, that was technique." I nodded. "And the way it looked at us—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Like we were intruding," he finished for me. "Like we weren't welcome. I haven't been kayaking since that day. I want to. I miss the water, the freedom, the wilderness, but something holds me back. When I close my eyes, I still see those dark, intelligent eyes looking at me. I still hear that sound rolling across the water. I still feel that primal fear that turned my blood to ice. I've spent countless hours researching Bigfoot sightings since then, particularly around Lake Superior and northern Ontario. There are more reports than I expected, many with details similar to what we experienced, remote locations, creatures displaying intelligence and purpose, intimidation behaviors rather than direct aggression. When people ask me if I believe in Bigfoot now, I don't know how to respond. Belief implies a choice, and this doesn't feel like a choice anymore. I saw what I saw. The creature was real. It was fishing in Lake Superior that morning. It warned us away from its territory. These aren't beliefs. They're facts etched into my memory. What haunts me most isn't the fear I felt in that moment. It's the realization that there are things in this world that exist completely apart from our human civilization. Things that have their own lives, their own skills, their own territories, and we know almost nothing about them. This creature wasn't some mindless beast. It had technique, it had purpose, it made decisions, it communicated. We think we've explored and documented everything on this planet, but that day on Lake Superior showed me how wrong we are. There are still mysteries in the wilderness, still things that defy our understanding. And sometimes, if you venture into the right places or the wrong ones, you might come face to face with them. I don't have any evidence, no photos. We were too shocked to even think about our phones. No physical proof. Just this story and the absolute certainty of what I saw. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself before that day. But I know what I saw on the northern shore of Lake Superior, and nothing will ever convince me otherwise. That creature is out there, still fishing in the shallows, still protecting its territory, and I can't help wondering how many others there are, living their lives just beyond the edge of our awareness, watching us from the shadows of the wilderness. Story 10. I'm still shaking as I type this, even though it happened 3 days ago. I keep thinking maybe it was just a bear or something, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear, not even close. Me and my buddies, we're all from Cincinnati, decided to do some camping last weekend in the woods of southeastern Indiana. Nothing fancy, just a little getaway from the city. We found this spot about a mile in from the main road, up on a small ridge overlooking a pond. Perfect spot, or so we thought. We set up our tent, got a small fire going, and just chilled for a while, drinking beers and catching up. It was hot as hell that night, like mid-July, hot where your clothes stick to you even after the sun goes down. There was a 3/4 moon out, bright enough that we could see pretty well without our flashlights most of the time. Before we turned in, we packed up all our food into this old pillowcase I brought and hung it from a branch about 15 feet up. My dad always taught me to do that to keep animals away. Fat lot of good it did us. We were all sitting around the dying fire, maybe around 11 at night, when Jason first heard it. He just kind of froze mid-sentence and tilted his head. "You guys hear that?" he asked. At first I didn't hear anything except the usual forest sounds, crickets, frogs down by the pond, the occasional hoot of an owl. But then I caught it, this weird low sound coming from the other side of the pond, maybe a 1/4 mile away. It wasn't quite a howl, wasn't quite a moan. It was like, I don't know how to describe it, except maybe like someone trying to imitate a whale song, but deeper and rougher. It made the hair on my arms stand up instantly. Probably just coyotes, Mike said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. We all got quiet, straining to listen. The sound came again, but this time it seemed closer, like whatever was making it had moved toward the pond. Then it happened again, and again, each time getting closer. "That's not coyotes," I whispered. Nobody argued. Then we heard splashing. Something was crossing through the shallows of the pond, heading in our direction. Something big. "Turn off the lantern," Jason hissed, and Mike quickly shut it off, leaving us in just moonlight. The splashing stopped, and for a minute I thought maybe whatever it was had gone away. But then we heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps crunching through the leaf litter on the trail that led up from the pond to our campsite. Slow, deliberate steps. Not the quick patter of a deer or the shuffling of a raccoon. These were heavy, purposeful. We all sat frozen. I don't think any of us even breathed. The footsteps got louder, closer, until they were maybe 30 yards away, just around the bend in the trail. Then we heard it sniffing. Long, deep inhales, like it was trying to catch our scent. The footsteps started again, closer and closer, until whatever it was had to be just outside the small clearing where we'd set up camp. That's when the branch cracked. Not the branch our food was on. Not yet. But a branch somewhere in the darkness at the edge of our sight, like something big had stepped on it or pushed against it. Then silence again, except for that deep, rhythmic breathing. I remember looking at Jason and Mike in the dim moonlight, their faces pale and frozen. None of us moved. None of us said a word. We just sat there like statues around the remains of our campfire, staring into the darkness where the sounds were coming from. Then there was a loud snap from above us, and our food bag dropped about halfway down the tree. Something had grabbed the branch it was hanging from and pulled it down. That's when we heard the ripping sound, the pillowcase being torn open, followed by the crinkling of chip bags and the unmistakable sound of something, eating, crunching chips, opening containers. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly all three of us were scrambling backward toward our tent. We practically dove inside, zipping it up behind us like that thin layer of nylon was going to protect us from whatever the hell was out there. "What the fuck is it?" Mike whispered, his voice shaking. "Shh," Jason hissed. We huddled there in the dark tent, listening to the sounds of our food being devoured just 15 feet away. I could hear plastic containers being opened, bags being torn, even the sound of something licking. Then I heard the distinct sound of an aluminum can being tossed aside, hitting a rock with a hollow clang. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I slowly turned and moved toward the tent window. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unzip the little mesh panel. I just had to see what was out there. I had to know. And I saw it. In the moonlight, not 10 feet from our tent, was something crouched on the ground, hunched over our food bag. It was massive, not tall at that moment since it was squatting, but I could tell it would stand at least 7 or 8 feet. It was covered in dark hair. Not fur, really. More like a shaggy coat that hung from its body. Its back was to me, but I could see the width of its shoulders, the thick, corded muscles along its back and arms as it dug through our torn pillowcase. Its head seemed almost pushed down into its shoulders like there wasn't much of a neck, kind of like a gorilla, but bigger, so much bigger. Its arms were long and powerful, not gangly but thick with muscle, and its thighs, even crouched down as it was, looked like tree trunks, bulging with strength. I watched, paralyzed, as it picked up the can of bean dip we'd brought and, I swear to God, licked the inside of it clean before casually tossing it aside. Then it grabbed a bag of tortilla chips and started eating them, methodically one by one. And the smell. Jesus Christ, the smell. It hit me as soon as I opened that window. This overwhelming, musky odor, like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. It wasn't just strong, it was primal. It made my stomach turn and my lizard brain scream, "Danger!" I slowly, carefully zipped the window back up and turned to the guys. "What is it?" Jason mouthed, not even daring to whisper. I shook my head. I couldn't say it. I couldn't say Bigfoot or Sasquatch, because that would make me sound insane. But that's what I'd seen. I'm sure of it. We sat there, huddled together in that tent, for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. Eventually we heard heavy footsteps again, moving away from our camp. But none of us dared to look outside or even speak above a whisper for the rest of the night. I don't think any of us slept. I know I didn't. I just lay there, sweating in the summer heat, straining my ears for any sound of it coming back. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves had me holding my breath. When the first light of dawn finally came, we waited another hour before we worked up the courage to unzip the tent and peek outside. Our campsite looked like a tornado had hit a convenience store. The branch that had held our food was pulled down to about 7 feet off the ground, still attached to the tree, but bent at an unnatural angle. The pillowcase had been completely shredded. Food wrappers, empty containers and crushed cans were scattered everywhere in a 15-foot radius. The bean dip can I'd seen it licking was there, scraped completely clean. A family-sized bag of chips was empty, torn open from the top, like someone had just ripped it apart. Our box of granola bars was crushed, empty wrappers strewn about. Even the plastic container of cookies my mom had sent with us was cracked open like an egg. Not a crumb left. We were picking through the mess, not saying much, all of us looking shell-shocked when we heard voices coming up the trail. It was another group of campers, 2 guys probably in their 30s, who had been camping on the hill about a quarter mile above us. "You guys get hit too," one of them called out as they approached. We nodded, and they came into our camp, looking around at the destruction. "Same thing happened to us," the taller one said. "Middle of the night, something got into all our food, pulled down the rope we had it hanging from." "Did you see anything?" I asked carefully. They exchanged a look. Nah, we stayed in our tent, the shorter one replied. Heard it though, sounded big. We're packing up, his buddy added, not sticking around to see if it comes back tonight. That was all the confirmation we needed. We broke camp in record time, stuffing our gear into our packs any which way, not bothering to clean up the food mess. I know that's terrible camping etiquette, but none of us wanted to spend another minute there than necessary. The hike back to the car was tense. We kept stopping to look over our shoulders, to peer into the thick brush alongside the trail. Every sound made us jump. I kept catching whiffs of that smell, that wild, musky odor, but it might have just been my imagination. We haven't talked much about what happened that night. When we do, we dance around what we actually think it was. Jason keeps saying it was probably a black bear, even though there aren't supposed to be any in that part of Indiana. Mike doesn't offer any theories at all, he just gets real quiet. But I know what I saw. That wasn't a bear. Bears don't have shoulders like that. They don't have arms and legs built like that. They don't move like that. I've been having trouble sleeping since we got back. Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing squatting there in the moonlight, methodically eating our chips, licking that bean dip can, with what I can only imagine was a massive tongue. I keep thinking about how easily it broke that branch, how powerful it must be, and I keep wondering, what if it hadn't just wanted our food? Story 11. I still remember that night from when I was about 10 years old. It's been over 20 years, but I can still feel the same terror washing over me when I think about it. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family because, well, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest. We lived in rural Louisiana, in this old house that sat right on the edge of Middle Fork Bottom, bordering Kisatchie National Forest. It was beautiful country, but isolated. Our nearest neighbor was almost a mile down the road. Growing up there, I was used to the sounds of the forest, the chirping crickets, hooting owls, and occasional coyote howls. But what happened that summer night was something else entirely. It was late July, hot and sticky like only Louisiana summers can be. Mom, my grandmother, and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. Dad worked nights at the paper mill, so it was just us three. Around 11 o'clock there was this massive bang against the side of the house, not like someone knocking, more like something huge had slammed into it. The whole house shook. The glasses in the kitchen cabinet rattled. The picture frames on the wall went crooked. My grandmother, who was never one to scare easily, jumped up immediately. "What in God's name was that?" she whispered. We all froze, listening. Then we heard it. Heavy footsteps moving alongside the house, slow and deliberate. Mum grabbed my arm so tight it hurt. "Stay still," she whispered. We were both staring at the dining room window, which faced the side yard. The blinds were partially open. Then it passed by. I'll never forget what I saw. This figure. It was so tall that it filled the entire window frame from bottom to top. Our ceilings were about 8 feet high, and the windows nearly reached them. Whatever this was, it had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It had these impossibly wide shoulders covered in dark hair. Not fur exactly, more like long, matted hair. It moved past the window in seconds, but those seconds are burned into my memory forever. Grandmother didn't hesitate. She went straight to the gun cabinet and pulled out her shotgun. "Get away from the windows," she ordered, and we did. She stood guard at the front door all night, gun loaded, refusing to sleep. Mom and I huddled together on the couch, too terrified to go to our bedrooms. The next morning, we checked outside. There were broken branches all around the side of the house, and a strange, musky smell hung in the air. Dad came home from his shift, and Mom told him everything. He looked concerned, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear, he suggested, though we all knew bears weren't common in our area. I thought maybe it was over, just a one-time thing. I was wrong. Fall came and the weather cooled off. I liked to sleep with my window cracked open for the fresh air. My bedroom was at the back of the house, facing the woods. One night in October, I was lying in bed, almost asleep when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy ones, crunching on the fallen leaves outside my window. They were slow, methodical. Then the breathing started. Deep, labored breathing, like something massive struggling to catch its breath. I froze in my bed, not daring to move a muscle. The footsteps stopped right outside my window. Then came this sound. This low, guttural moaning that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't aggressive, more like mournful, but it wasn't human. God, it was nothing like a human sound. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but lie there with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The moaning continued, sometimes rising slightly in pitch, sometimes dropping to an almost inaudible rumble. It was communicating something, I'm sure of it. Mom was in the bathroom down the hall when she heard it too. She later told me she'd never moved so fast in her life. She burst into my room, grabbed me without a word, and dragged me to her bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind us. We huddled together, listening to those footsteps move around the house for what felt like hours. Eventually, they faded away. In the morning, Dad found broken sticks and branches scattered across our backyard, arranged in an odd pattern that didn't look natural, like something had deliberately placed them there. He tried to laugh it off, said it was probably just the wind, but I saw the way his hands trembled as he picked them up. Behind our property ran this old dirt road that led to an abandoned oil well. A few days after that night, I was playing back there with our dog, Rusty, something I probably shouldn't have been doing alone, looking back on it. The ground was soft from recent rain, and there, pressed into what was almost like soft rock, were these footprints. They weren't like any prints I'd ever seen. They were huge, easily twice the size of my dad's boots. But the strangest thing was, they only had 4 toes, 4 massive toes, with the impression so deep in the ground that whatever made them had to be incredibly heavy, and the stride length between them. I paced it out, and they were about 5 feet apart, 5 feet between steps. No human walks like that. I ran home and dragged my mum out there to see. The color drained from her face. She took pictures with her old camera, but when she got the film developed, they came out blurry and indistinct. Over the next few months, we started noticing patterns. Whenever it was around, that's what we called it, just it, our dogs would disappear. We had 2, Rusty and Blue, and they were brave dogs, farm dogs. But they'd vanish for days at a time, then turn up at our neighbor's house down the road, whimpering and refusing to come back home until whatever had scared them was gone. We also started finding things in the woods. About a quarter-mile into the forest from our backyard, there was this huge rotted oak tree that had fallen years ago. Behind it, we discovered what looked like a bedding area, leaves and grass piled up in a deliberate nest-like formation. Nearby were small, neat piles of animal bones and feathers, carefully arranged, not scattered like you'd expect from an animal kill, but placed with purpose. The most unsettling thing was when we started noticing smaller footprints appearing alongside the larger ones on that dirt road. Same shape, same 4 toes, but smaller, like a child version walking with the adult. Over time, as months passed, those smaller prints got bigger, until eventually the original large prints stopped appearing altogether. Just the now grown smaller ones remained, like we were watching a juvenile creature grow up before our eyes. One morning in late spring, I was eating breakfast when I noticed something outside the kitchen window. On the bird feeder that hung from a tree about 15 yards from the house was a small, carefully arranged pile of colorful rocks, not just thrown there, stacked in a little pyramid. I told Mom, and she looked like she might be sick. "It's watching us," she whispered. "It's been watching us the whole time." Grandmother took to keeping her shotgun by her bedside every night. Dad installed motion sensor lights all around the property, though they were constantly being triggered by who knows what in the middle of the night. We'd wake up to them flooding the yard with light, but by the time anyone looked outside, there was never anything there. Just those lights illuminating the edge of the dark woods. I'd hear that breathing sometimes at night, that deep, heavy breathing outside my window. I started sleeping in Mom and Dad's room more often, claiming nightmares. They never questioned it. They knew. The worst night, the one that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, happened in summer again, almost exactly a year after the first incident. It was hot, and we had the windows open with box fans running. Around midnight, the power went out. Complete darkness except for the moonlight filtering through the trees. In that silence, without the humming of the fans, we could hear everything, and what we heard were footsteps, not just one set but two, circling the house, moving in perfect synchronization. Then the banging started again. Boom, 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 like they were testing the walls, looking for a way in. Grandmother stood in the hallway with her shotgun, while Dad grabbed his rifle. Mom and I huddled in the bathtub, the only room without windows. The banging continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, we heard something new, a kind of chittering sound like they were communicating with each other. Then, in the kitchen, the window shattered. Dad fired a warning shot into the air through the front door. There was a moment of total silence, then this sound, I'll never forget it, like a scream mixed with a roar, so loud it seemed to vibrate through the walls, then pounding footsteps racing away into the forest. When morning came, we found the kitchen window completely destroyed. On the floor beneath it was a rock about the size of a softball surrounded by broken glass, and on the kitchen table, our kitchen table, inside our locked house, was a pile of freshly picked wildflowers arranged in a circle. We moved 3 weeks later, left most of our furniture behind, just packed what we could fit in our cars, and went to stay with my aunt in Texas. Dad said it was because he found a better job there, but I knew the real reason. We all did. To this day, I can't explain what happened, what those things were. I've read about Bigfoot sightings since then, seen the documentaries and the blurry photos. None of it captures what we experienced. The intelligence behind it, the curiosity, the way it seemed to be studying us as much as we were afraid of it. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that deep, labored breathing outside my window, and for a split second, I'm 10 years old again, paralyzed with fear, knowing that something impossible is out there in the dark. Story 12. I've been sitting on this experience for a while now, trying to make sense of what my wife and I encountered. I'm not usually one for sharing personal stories online, but I need to tell someone who might believe me. I'm still struggling to process what happened, both 3 years ago and just last month when we went back. It started during what should have been a routine hike. My wife and I consider ourselves experienced hikers, nothing professional, just weekend warriors who know the local trails well. We were exploring a familiar forest about 20 miles from our home, an area we'd hiked maybe a dozen times before. It was mid-October, crisp but not cold, perfect hiking weather. That day, we decided to venture off our usual path. There was an old logging road we'd noticed before, but never explored. It hadn't been used in years, overgrown with vegetation and clearly abandoned. Something about it just called to us that day. "Let's see where it goes," my wife suggested, and I agreed without hesitation. The logging road was rough going. Fallen branches, uneven ground, thorny bushes grabbing at our clothes. We'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes when we reached a clearing that felt different. The air seemed heavier there, if that makes sense. Quieter too. I remember noticing there weren't any birds singing, which struck me as odd but not alarming at the time. About 50 yards ahead, we spotted something that looked out of place. At first, I thought it was just storm damage, maybe some fallen trees. But as we got closer, I realized this was something else entirely. What we found was unlike anything I've ever seen in nature. It was a structure, and I use that word deliberately because this wasn't random debris. This was constructed. It looked like a massive nest or den, probably 15 to 20 feet long. The base was made of decomposing cedar branches, moss, sawdust, and dirt. All of it had been woven and packed together with incredible precision, covering what appeared to be a large hole in the ground. "Are you seeing this?" my wife whispered. Her voice had that edge to it, the one that tells you something isn't right. The structure had several heavy trees dragged across the top of the hole like support beams. Around the perimeter, 15 to 20 trees, mostly saplings and mid-sized ones, had been cleanly snapped at about the 6-foot mark, not broken by wind or weather. These were deliberate breaks, fresh ones. The trees had been arranged to form outer walls and what looked like a roof, creating a sort of funnel-like path leading to the hole. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I've seen beaver dams, bear dens, all sorts of animal homes. This was different. The engineering involved was unsettling. No animal I know builds like this. There was intent behind it, purpose. I stepped onto a fallen log at the edge of the structure to get a better look. That's when my wife grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. "Don't move," she hissed. Her face had gone completely white. "There's something in there." She was staring at a spot right beside my leg. I followed her gaze and saw it, a black void within the structure, a hole maybe 2 feet wide. And inside that hole, I'll never forget this as long as I live, 2 silvery black eyes blinking slowly in the darkness. My entire body went cold. Those eyes weren't animal eyes, at least not any animal I recognized. They were too aware, too intelligent. They were watching us, assessing us. Before I could react, it started. 3 sharp, echoing bangs rang out from the surrounding forest. The sound was like boulders being hurled against tree trunks with tremendous force. Boom, boom, boom. Then silence. We froze, not daring to move. My wife's hand was still clamped on my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through my jacket. I could feel her trembling, or maybe that was me. Then it happened again. 3 more thunderous impacts, but this time they came from directly beneath us. The force was so strong, it physically shifted the ground and packed debris under my feet. I felt the log I was standing on vibrate. Whatever was making that noise was massive, powerful. I slowly stepped back from the hole, trying not to make any sudden movements. My wife and I exchanged glances and began whispering, trying to figure out what to do. "We need to leave. Now," I breathed. "What the hell is that thing?" She whispered back. The response was immediate. 3 more bone-jarring thuds from below, so powerful I swear I felt them in my chest. It was reacting to our voices. It heard us whispering and was sending a message. "I know you're there." That's when we ran. No discussion, no plan. Pure instinct took over. We scrambled up the embankment away from the structure, tripping over roots and sliding in the dirt. As I glanced back over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of something rising from the hole. A black form, massive and moving with purpose. I didn't stay to get a better look. We tore through the forest, abandoning the logging road and cutting straight through the underbrush toward what we hoped was the main trail. My wife was ahead of me by a few yards when she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. "Look," she gasped, pointing to our right. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, a black figure was running parallel to our path. It was moving on 2 legs, but in a strange, loping gait that covered ground alarmingly fast. It seemed to be trying to cut us off before we reached the main trail. We changed direction, veering left and scrambling down a steep slope. I fell hard, sliding on my back and scraping my hands raw on rocks and branches as I tried to slow my descent. My wife somehow managed to stay upright, grabbing trees to control her speed. When we finally reached the main trail, we didn't stop running until we hit the parking lot. My lungs were burning, legs shaking, heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. We locked ourselves in our car and sat there panting, unable to speak for several minutes. "What the fuck was that?" my wife finally managed to say. I had no answer. Nothing in my experience as an outdoorsman could explain what we'd just seen. The next day, we contacted the local conservation officers and reported finding what we described as a strange bear den. They seemed dismissive, explaining that bears don't build structures like what we described. One officer suggested it might have been an illegal hunter's blind, but that didn't explain the eyes, the wood that had been chewed and packed together, or those thunderous impacts that shook the ground. I tried to forget about it. We both did. For 3 years, we hiked different trails, different forests. We never spoke about what happened that day, as if by mutual, silent agreement, but it was always there, hovering at the edges of our conversations whenever we discussed going hiking. Then, last month, some friends invited us to join them for a group hike. 6 of us total, my wife and me, our friends Mark and Sarah, and 2 women they knew from work. The location they suggested was about 5 miles from where we'd had our experience 3 years earlier, but it was a completely different trail system. We figured it would be fine, especially in a group. It started normally enough. Beautiful day, good company, everyone in high spirits. We were about 2 hours in when things started to feel off. First came the vocalizations, distant at first, like someone calling out but not quite human, more like the howl you'd hear in a movie, but deeper, resonating. "Is that a wolf?" asked one of the women, Lisa. "No wolves around here," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I caught my wife's eye and saw she was thinking the same thing I was. The sounds continued, sometimes seeming to come from in front of us, sometimes from behind. It was as if whatever was making them was circling our group, tracking us. Everyone noticed it, though no one wanted to be the first to suggest turning back. Then the atmosphere changed. It's hard to describe, but the forest suddenly felt hostile. That same heavy silence we'd experienced 3 years ago descended, broken only by those strange calls. A prickle of fear crept up my spine. That primal, instinctive fear humans have carried since we lived in caves. "I think we should head back," my wife suggested, her voice tight. The others agreed quickly, too quickly. They felt it too. We hadn't gone more than a quarter mile back down the trail when Lisa, who was at the rear of our group, gasped loudly. We all turned to see her standing frozen, staring off into the trees. "There's something there," she whispered. "I just saw it cross behind that fallen tree." We all looked. At first, I saw nothing. Then a movement caught my eye, a large black shape shifting between 2 pines about 30 yards away. It was tall, at least 7 feet, moving with that same strange gait I remembered. "What did you see exactly?" I asked Lisa, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was big," she said, her voice shaking. "Light brown hair, long fringes down its arms, built like a skinny man, but not a man." Mark laughed nervously. "Probably just a bear," he said, but nobody believed it. Bears don't move like that. We picked up our pace, almost jogging down the trail. The feeling of being watched intensified. Twice more, we caught glimpses of something moving parallel to our path, always just at the edge of clear visibility. It seemed to be herding us, guiding our movement. What struck me most was the intelligence behind it. This wasn't a curious animal following hikers. This was calculated, purposeful. It knew exactly what it was doing, escorting us out of its territory. The final stretch of trail opened onto a meadow we had to cross to reach the parking area. As we emerged from the tree line, I felt a momentary relief. Surely whatever was following us wouldn't venture into the open. I was wrong. As we crossed the meadow, a sound came from the forest edge behind us. 3 distinct knocks, just like we'd heard 3 years ago. Boom, boom, boom. Everyone heard it. Everyone stopped. "What the hell was that?" Mark asked, eyes wide. "Keep moving," I said quietly. "Just keep walking. Don't run." We made it back to our vehicles without further incident, but the feeling of being watched didn't subside until we were miles away. Later, over drinks at a local bar, everyone tried to rationalize what had happened. Bear, elk, maybe some local playing a prank. But Lisa was adamant about what she'd seen, and my wife and I exchanged knowing glances. I've spent weeks researching what we might have encountered. I've read about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wild men of the woods. I'm not saying that's what it was, but I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a hunter, wasn't any known animal. Whatever lives in those woods is intelligent. It builds structures, it communicates, it defends its territory, and it doesn't want us there. I haven't been back to those trails since, and I don't plan to. Some places in the wilderness aren't meant for us. I've learned to respect that boundary the hard way. Story 13. I've never shared this story with anyone outside my immediate family because I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy. But I can't stop thinking about it, especially when I'm alone at night. What happened to us on that road to Port Renfrew still makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It was August 26th, 2006, a date permanently etched in my memory. My stepson and his girlfriend had come to visit for the weekend, and I'd promised them some good fishing and crabbing at Port Renfrew on Vancouver Island. The weather forecast looked perfect, and I was excited to show them some of my favorite spots along the coast. We loaded up my old Ford F-150 with all our gear that morning. I'd hitched up my 16-foot aluminum fishing boat on the trailer the night before, making sure everything was secure. We packed the coolers with food, drinks, and the crab bait, some salmon heads and chicken parts sealed in plastic containers in the truck bed. Nothing fancy, but usually effective for catching Dungeness crabs. We left home around 3 in the afternoon, wanting to get to our destination before dark so we could set up camp. The drive was beautiful, typical Vancouver Island scenery with dense forests and occasional glimpses of the ocean. We were all in good spirits, talking about past fishing trips and what we hoped to catch this time around. About 20 kilometers south of the Misaki Lake turnoff, I started feeling like the trailer was swaying a bit more than normal. You know that feeling when you're pulling something and it just doesn't feel right? It was like that. So I pulled over onto the shoulder to check the straps and make sure everything was still secure. "Everything okay, Dad?" my stepson asked as I hopped out. "Just being cautious," I told him. "Want to make sure the boat's not shifting." I walked around the trailer, checking the tie-downs, the safety chains, and making sure the boat was still centered on the trailer. Everything looked fine. The winch strap at the bow was tight, the safety latch was engaged, and the rear tie-downs were secure. I gave the boat a little push to test it, solid as a rock. "All good," I announced, getting back into the driver's seat. Better safe than sorry. We continued down the road. It was getting darker now, around 7:30 in the evening. The road was completely empty, no other vehicles in either direction. That part of the island gets pretty remote, especially as you get closer to Port Renfrew. The forest was thick on both sides of the road, tall trees blocking what remained of the daylight. We'd only gone about 300 meters when my stepson asked if we could stop again so he could change the CD. The music had started skipping and he wanted to put something else on. I pulled over, leaving the engine running but putting the truck in park. I remember hitting the brake firmly. It's just habit when you're hauling a trailer. My stepson was flipping through his CD case when it happened. The truck suddenly lurched sideways, and I don't mean a gentle movement. It was violent enough that we all jolted in our seats. It felt like someone had grabbed the side of the vehicle and pushed it with incredible force. "What the hell?" I remember saying. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. My stepson looked at me with wide eyes. "Are we rolling? Are we sliding off the road?" "No," I said, feeling my heart racing. "We're in park. My foot's on the brake." Then it happened again. The truck rocked, harder this time, and I could feel the entire rig, truck, trailer, and boat sway as if something was physically pushing against it. The movement was so forceful that the contents of the glove compartment shifted, and my coffee mug fell from the cup holder. "Dad, Dad!" My stepson was pointing out the back window, his voice filled with panic. His girlfriend was in the back seat, and she suddenly cried out, "Something's pushing the trailer!" The boat's moving toward the ditch. I twisted around to look, but all I could see through the rear window was the bow of my boat and the darkness beyond. The interior lights were on because of the open doors, which made it even harder to see outside. "Can you see what it is?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "No," she replied, her voice shaking. "I can't see anything, but something's there. The trailer's moving." That's when I felt another push, strong enough that I heard the trailer hitch creaking under the strain. Whatever was out there was trying to push us off the road and into the ditch. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I slammed the truck into drive and hit the gas. The tires spun for a moment before catching, and we lurched forward. I didn't slow down for at least a kilometer, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, anything, following us. But there was nothing, just darkness. When I finally felt safe enough to slow down, my stepson said, "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I admitted, my hands still shaking on the wheel. "But let's check the boat when we get somewhere with more light." We drove the rest of the way to Port Renfrew in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I kept the speed up, not wanting whatever had pushed us to catch up. My mind was racing through possibilities. A bear, maybe. But what bear is strong enough to rock a truck and trailer, and why would it push rather than just try to get to the food? We reached the campground around 8:15, and I immediately drove to an area with good lighting near the main building. We all got out, and I could see the fear still etched on their faces, the same fear I was feeling. What we found when we checked the boat and trailer made my blood run cold. The bow safety latch, a metal hook that's supposed to prevent the boat from slipping off the trailer, was stretched out like taffy. It was completely non-functional, bent in a way that would have required enormous strength. The nylon winch strap that secures the front of the boat to the trailer was split down the middle, the fibers frayed as if something had pulled it apart. But that wasn't the worst of it. The rear tie-downs, heavy-duty straps made to secure the back of the boat, were torn and stretched, and the boat itself had shifted several inches on the trailer, no longer centered the way I had so carefully positioned it earlier. "Dad," my stepson whispered, running his fingers over the damaged safety latch. "What could have done this?" I had no answer. Whatever had pushed our truck and damaged the trailer equipment had to be incredibly strong. The safety latch alone would require hundreds of pounds of force to bend like that. We stayed at the campground that night, but none of us slept well. The next morning, after securing the boat as best we could with some spare ropes I had, we decided to go back to the spot where it had happened. In daylight, I thought, maybe we'd find an explanation. Signs of a landslide, perhaps, or some evidence of what had been there. We found nothing. The shoulder of the road was undisturbed. There were no unusual tracks, no signs that the earth had moved, no fallen trees or rocks, nothing that could explain the force that had nearly pushed us off the road the night before. Could it have been a bear? My stepson's girlfriend suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "No bear is that strong," I said. "And why would it push the trailer rather than try to get to the bait in the truck bed?" "Maybe it was trying to tip the boat to get to the bait," she offered, "but the crab bait had been secured in the truck bed, not in the boat, and it was sealed in plastic containers that shouldn't have allowed much scent to escape." We spent the day fishing, but our hearts weren't in it. That night, we decided to head home a day early. None of us wanted to drive that road in the dark again, so we left early enough to make it back before sunset. As we passed the spot where it had happened, we all fell silent. I slowed down slightly, scanning the tree line, half expecting to see something watching us from the forest, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. It's been 16 years since that night, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened. I've gone back to that area many times since, always in daylight, looking for clues. I've researched the history of the area, looking for similar incidents. I've considered every possible explanation. Animals, earth movements, even drunk locals playing a prank. Nothing fits. Nothing explains the immense strength required to damage that trailer equipment and move a 16-foot boat. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about what would have happened if we'd gotten out of the truck to investigate instead of driving away. What would we have seen in those dark woods? What was strong enough to push a truck and trailer but didn't leave a single trace of its presence? I don't have answers, but I know what I felt that night. The undeniable sensation of something massive pushing against our vehicle with incredible force. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone on remote roads at dusk, I catch myself checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary, watching for something that I can't see but know might be there. Whatever it was, that night near Port Renfrew, it changed the way I see the world. Some things simply can't be explained, and sometimes that's the scariest realization of all. Story 14. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my immediate circle. Even now, typing this out, my hands are getting clammy, and I'm second-guessing whether I should share it at all. But after seeing similar accounts pop up in this community, I feel like maybe someone here will understand or have experienced something similar. Back in 1980, I moved to Castle Rock in Douglas County, Colorado. I was young, just out of high school, and excited to be on my own for the first time. The house I rented was nothing special, but it had this awesome view of the mountains that I fell in love with immediately. Within my first week there, I met my neighbor, who was about the same age as me. Let's just call him D. We hit it off right away, both of us being outdoorsy types with a serious case of adventure fever. That whole summer became one long outdoor excursion. We fished, hiked, camped, and eventually started off-roading once I scraped together enough money to buy a beat-up four-wheel drive. Looking back, those first few months were some of the best times of my life. We spent most of our weekends exploring the Devil's Head and Rampart Range area near Sedalia. The landscape there was incredible. Dense forests, rocky outcroppings, and these serene little streams that were perfect for fishing. In April, after I finally got my four-wheel drive working properly, we pushed deeper into the wilderness than we'd ever gone before. We found this perfect little spot, a small clearing next to a stream, surrounded by tall pines and far enough from any trails that we rarely saw other people. It quickly became our regular campsite. We'd go there almost every other weekend, sometimes just for the day, other times camping overnight. It was during our third or fourth visit to this spot when we noticed something strange. We arrived late afternoon, and as we were setting up camp, I spotted what looked like footprints running straight through our campsite. At first, I didn't think much of it. People hike through these woods all the time, right? But when I took a closer look, my stomach dropped. These weren't just any footprints, they were bare feet, definitely human-shaped, but massive. I wear a size 11 boot, and these prints were at least 1.5 times the size of my foot. I called D over to look, and he confirmed what I was seeing. The prints were deep too, like whatever made them was really heavy. They came directly from the thick forest on one side of our clearing, passed right through where we usually set up our tent, and disappeared back into the woods on the other side. Maybe it's just some hiker with really big feet, D suggested, but I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. Who hikes barefoot through rocky, pine needle-covered forest terrain? We debated leaving, but decided to stay. Daylight was fading, and we'd already driven all the way out there. We agreed to keep the fire going all night and take turns keeping watch, though we never explicitly said what we were watching for. That night, neither of us slept much. Every snapping twig or rustling branch had us both wide awake, staring into the darkness beyond our firelight. Nothing happened that night, and by morning we had nearly convinced ourselves that the footprints were probably just some weird coincidence. Maybe a barefoot hiker with abnormally large feet, maybe some kind of prank. We continued using that campsite throughout the summer, though I noticed we both became more alert, more watchful of our surroundings. Fast forward to September. It was getting cooler, and we knew fishing season was wrapping up for us. For this trip, we brought along 2 female friends, Jay and Kay, who had been begging to see our secret camping spot all summer. It was mid-afternoon, and we were all fishing along different parts of the stream. I remember it was a perfect day, not too hot, clear blue sky, with that crisp early autumn feel in the air. I was focusing on trying to hook this trout I'd been eyeing when I heard Kay gasp. Looking up, I followed her gaze to a rocky outcropping about 100 yards up the hill from the stream. What I saw next froze me in place. 2 enormous figures had emerged from the tree line and were standing on the rocks above us. Even from that distance, I could tell they were huge, way taller and broader than any human I'd ever seen. They were covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair from head to toe. They stood upright, completely bipedal, just watching us. For a few seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then Dee broke the silence. "Hey!" he shouted up at them. "What the hell are you doing?" At first we thought maybe it was some local guys in costumes trying to scare us. Dee started yelling names, cussing, trying to get a reaction. I joined in, partly out of bravado and partly because I desperately wanted them to be pranksters. "Take off those stupid costumes," I remember yelling, my voice cracking slightly. The figures just stood there for another moment, then moved behind some rocks and disappeared from view. We all looked at each other, nervous laughter bubbling up. "That was weird," Jay said, reeling in her line. "Do you think they were—" "Oh my God," Kay interrupted, her face draining of color. "They're coming down." We all turned to where Kay was pointing. Through the trees on the hillside, I caught glimpses of movement, dark shapes moving between the pines, heading in our direction. They were moving fast, much faster than seemed possible, given the steep, rocky terrain. That's when the panic hit. Jay dropped her fishing rod completely. Dee swore loudly. I remember my heart hammering in my chest as we all scrambled to gather our stuff. "Leave it! Just go!" Dee shouted, already heading toward where we'd parked the 4-wheel drive. I grabbed what gear was closest to me, my tackle box and 1 rod, and ran after him. Jay and Kay were right behind me. We left at least half our fishing equipment behind, scattered along the stream bank. I remember looking back once as we ran and seeing something large moving through the tree line, still coming downhill toward us. We piled into the vehicle, and I've never driven so recklessly in my life, bouncing over ruts and rocks, not even caring if I damaged the undercarriage. Nobody spoke until we hit the main forest road, all of us breathing hard, looking back over our shoulders. "What the actual fuck was that?" Jay finally asked, her voice shaking. None of us had an answer. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe hunters in ghillie suits, maybe some kind of prank. But deep down, I think we all knew what we'd seen wasn't human. The next day, Kay showed up at my house looking determined. She pulled out her father's .38 revolver from her purse. "We need to go back and get our stuff," she said, "and I'm bringing protection this time." I was shocked both by her suggestion and the fact that she'd taken her dad's gun without permission. Dee was reluctant but eventually agreed. We planned to go back the following weekend, armed and in broad daylight. That plan fell apart when Kay's dad discovered his gun was missing. There was a huge blow-up, and she was grounded for weeks. During one of our phone conversations while she was still grounded, Kay revealed something that made my skin crawl. Apparently, her father had encountered something similar in that same area about a month earlier. He'd been hunting alone and saw what he described as a massive, hair-covered creature moving through the trees. He'd been drinking, though, and had convinced himself it was just an alcohol-induced hallucination. After that, our enthusiasm for our remote campsite waned considerably. By March of 1981, we'd limited our excursions to areas much closer to home, places with regular traffic and other people around. One weekend, we decided to explore an area between Castle Rock and Franktown that seemed safe enough, fairly open terrain with good visibility. We were walking along a small creek when we came across a sandbar that had formed after the spring melt. Sitting on that sandbar was something I still have trouble describing. At first glance, it looked like a large, partially decayed animal head. But as we got closer, we realized it was unlike anything we'd ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a beer keg, and covered in matted black shaggy hair. The decay had exposed parts of what looked like a skull, but the proportions and features were all wrong. The eye sockets were set deep and forward, more like a primate than a bear or any other local wildlife. But the most disturbing feature was the teeth. They weren't pointed like a predator's. They were squarish, almost human-like, but massive, running across both jaws. We stood there staring at it, neither of us willing to touch it. I remember thinking we should take it, show it to someone, a park ranger or biologist. But in the end, we just left it there. I've regretted that decision for over 40 years now. Whatever that was, it might have provided some answers. After these experiences, my enthusiasm for the outdoors diminished significantly. I still went fishing occasionally, but always in popular, well-trafficked spots. My off-roading adventures were limited to established trails where other vehicles were present. Dan and I remained friends, but we rarely spoke about what we'd seen. It was like a silent agreement between us. Some things are better left undiscussed. To this day, I don't know what we encountered in those Colorado woods. I've read about Bigfoot sightings and other similar creatures, and some descriptions match what we saw. But reading about something and actually seeing it with your own eyes are two very different things. Sometimes I think about going back, now that I'm older and perhaps a little braver, but then I remember the way those creatures moved down that hillside with purpose, with speed. And I decide my fishing days in remote locations are definitely behind me. Story 15. Mysteris. I'm still not sure why I'm finally writing this down after all these years. Maybe it's because I still wake up some nights hearing that sound in my head. Maybe it's because I need someone to believe me. I don't know. What I do know is that what happened to me in the Ozarks back in May of 2010 changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I used to go camping alone a lot. Never really bothered me. I actually preferred it. No chit-chat, no compromises on where to set up or what to eat. Just me, my gear, and the wilderness. I'd been planning this particular trip for months, a week-long solo hike deep into the Ozark wilderness in Arkansas. I'd researched the trails, packed light but thorough, and driven 5 hours to get to my starting point. By the third day, I'd hiked pretty far from any marked trails. That was intentional. I wanted to really get away from everything. Around mid-afternoon, I found this perfect spot. A small clearing surrounded by dense forest with a little stream about 50 yards away. Plenty of flat ground for my tent and a natural fire pit where someone had clearly camped before. It seemed ideal. I set up my tent, gathered firewood while it was still daylight, and settled in. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, around 65 degrees. Warm enough during the day, cool enough at night to justify a good campfire. I remember feeling so content as the sun started to set, watching the sky turn orange and purple through the gaps in the trees. After cooking some freeze-dried pasta on my little camp stove, I got a decent fire going. Nothing huge, just enough to keep me warm and provide some light. The stars were incredible that night. No light pollution, just a brilliant canopy of stars above the clearing. I remember thinking how small I felt under that sky, but in a good way. It must have been around midnight when things changed. I was just sitting there, poking at the fire with a stick, watching the embers float up. The forest had that nighttime quiet to it, not completely silent, but just the background noise of insects and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then I heard it, branches snapping, somewhere in the woods behind me. Now, I've been camping enough times to know that sounds in the forest at night are normal. Could be anything, a raccoon, a deer, whatever. but there was something about these sounds that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They weren't random. They were deliberate, rhythmic almost, like footsteps, heavy footsteps. I grabbed my lantern and stood up. My first thought was bear, though I hadn't seen any signs of them in the area. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling stupid. If it was an animal, I was just alerting it to my presence. If it was a person, well, I was alone in the woods, miles from anywhere. The snapping sounds stopped. Complete silence fell over the clearing. Even the insects seemed to quiet down. That's when I really got scared, when everything went quiet. I held my lantern higher, turning slowly, scanning the edge of the clearing. That's when I saw it, a shape, just at the tree line about 30 yards away. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks, the way firelight can make the darkness move. But then it moved, deliberately, purposefully. In that moment, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The shape was too big to be a person, too upright to be a bear. I froze, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I stood there, lantern extended like some pathetic shield, the shape stepped slightly forward, just enough for the firelight to catch it, and that's when I saw it clearly. It was a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, believe me. If someone had told me this story before that night, I'd have nodded politely while thinking they were full of shit. But there it was, standing at the edge of my clearing, as real as the ground beneath my feet. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, and that's not an exaggeration. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over what I'd imagine someone my height would look like from that distance. Its entire body was covered in dark, shaggy hair, but I could see lighter patches on its chest and around its face. What struck me most were its arms. They hung down almost to its knees, way longer proportionally than a human's. The shoulders on this thing, Jesus. They were massive, like a linebacker times 3. The width of its upper body was just impossible. No human is built like that, not even close. The firelight caught its face, and that's the image that still wakes me up at night. It had this heavy brow that shadowed its eyes, but I could still see them catching the light, reflecting back with this dull glow. Its nose was wide and flat, and below that was a mouth that seemed too big for any face I'd ever seen. I could hear it breathing. That's how quiet everything else had become. From 30 yards away, I could hear these deep, heavy breaths. In, out, almost like it was smelling me. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 seconds. Then it did something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It reached out with these long, powerful fingers and deliberately, I mean with obvious intention, snapped a branch it was holding. Crack. The sound echoed across the clearing. This wasn't an accidental step on a dry twig. This was communication. It was telling me something. Then it tilted its head, like a dog that hears a strange sound, just slightly to one side, studying me. There was intelligence in that movement, curiosity. This wasn't just some animal. There was something behind those eyes, something thinking, assessing. It took a step forward, just one, toward the edge of the clearing, and my whole body went cold. I couldn't move, I couldn't run, I couldn't even look away. The thing was maybe 25 yards from me now, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that if it wanted to, it could cross that distance before I could even turn around. That's when it made the sound. I've tried to describe this sound to myself over the years, tried to find something to compare it to, but there's nothing. It started deep in its chest. I could actually see its body vibrate with it. And then it came out as this growl that was lower and more powerful than anything I've ever heard. Not like a bear or a lion at the zoo. This was something ancient, something primal. It didn't just hear the sound, I felt it in my bones. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was controlled, deliberate, a warning. After that, it just watched me for another few seconds. Then, still maintaining eye contact, it slowly backed into the trees. It didn't turn around. It backed away, step by step, until the darkness swallowed it completely. I stood there, lantern still raised, for what must have been 5 minutes. I couldn't move. I couldn't process what I'd just seen. Part of my brain was screaming that it wasn't possible, while another part knew with absolute certainty that it had been real. Finally, my survival instincts kicked in. I threw every piece of wood I had onto the fire, building it up as high as I dared. I dug through my pack for my flashlight, my knife, as if a 3-inch blade would do anything against what I'd just seen. I pulled my tent closer to the fire, even though I knew there was no way in hell I was going to sleep. All night long, I heard things moving in the forest around me, snapping branches, rustling leaves. Once, around 3 in the morning, I heard a tree crack in the distance. Not fall, just crack, like something immensely strong had put pressure on it. I kept my lantern lit and sat with my back to the fire, watching the trees, jumping at every sound. I've never been so aware of how vulnerable I was, how alone, how far from help. My cell phone had no signal. My car was a day's hike away. If that thing came back, there was absolutely nothing I could do. As the first hint of dawn started to lighten the sky, the forest began to wake up. Birds started calling. The normal sounds returned. Somehow that was almost worse. This return to normalcy after what I'd experienced felt surreal, like the world was pretending nothing had happened. I didn't wait for full daylight. As soon as I could see well enough to hike, I packed up my gear. I left some of the heavier stuff behind, my camp stove, some food. I just stuffed my sleeping bag and the essentials into my pack and got the hell out of there. I didn't even take the time to properly put out the fire. I just kicked dirt over it until it wasn't actively burning anymore. The entire hike back, I never turned around, not once. I could feel eyes on my back the whole way, though I never heard anything following me. It took me 5 hours of hard hiking to reach my car, and I've never been so happy to see a parking lot in my life. I've thought about reporting what I saw, but to who? The park rangers? The local police? What would I even say? Excuse me, I saw a 9-foot-tall, hairy humanoid in the woods. They'd think I was crazy or drunk or both. I've never gone camping alone again. I've barely gone camping at all, and never anywhere that remote. Sometimes I try to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, the isolation, the darkness, the unfamiliar environment. But then I remember the sound it made, the way it deliberately snapped that branch, the intelligence in its eyes, and I know it was real. Whatever I saw that night in the Ozarks was real, and it knew I was there. It chose to let me see it, and then it chose to let me go. Sometimes I wonder why, and sometimes late at night, I wonder if it's still out there, breaking branches in the darkness. Story 16. I've never told this story before outside my family. Even though it happened way back in the summer of '68, when I was just 11 years old, it still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. Some things you just don't forget, no matter how much time passes. My family had this cottage up in Muskoka, Ontario. It was nothing fancy, just a simple wooden place with a screened porch and a few bedrooms, but to us kids, it was paradise. Those summers were always magical. Swimming in the lake all day, catching frogs, roasting marshmallows, the whole deal. This particular night was ridiculously hot, even for July. The kind of sticky, suffocating heat where your sheets feel like they're made of plastic wrap. My parents had opened every single window in the cottage to try and catch whatever sad excuse for a breeze might come along. Our sleeping arrangements were pretty simple. My younger siblings, I had 2 little brothers, shared the room next to mine. They'd already conked out around 8:30, completely exhausted from a day of running wild. The adults, my parents, aunt and uncle, were still up in the family room down the hall, talking and probably having a few beers. I could hear their voices and occasional laughter drifting down the hallway. I remember going to bed around 10. I wasn't particularly tired, but there wasn't much else to do. No TV at the cottage, and it was too dark to go outside. My bedroom had these 3 double casement windows that faced the back of the property where the trees started. They were all pushed wide open that night, with the screens in place, of course. I turned off the light, flopped onto my bed, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the chorus of frogs and crickets outside. The moonlight was streaming in, casting these weird shadows across my room. That's when it happened. I swear it couldn't have been more than 2 minutes after I turned off the light. I got this overwhelming feeling of being watched, and I don't mean the normal kid imagines monsters in the dark kind of feeling. This was different. It was like a physical weight pressing down on me. The hairs on my arms stood straight up, and my heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The feeling was coming from behind me, from the direction of the windows. I froze. Completely froze. I couldn't even breathe. Every instinct was screaming at me not to look, but I knew I had to. After what felt like forever, I finally threw back the covers and whipped around to face the windows, and there it was. In the far left window, between the windowsill and the open pane, was this head, a large, roundish head, just there, watching me. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just this dark silhouette, and there were no hands visible on the sill, which somehow made it even more terrifying. When I suddenly moved, it seemed startled. It ducked down quickly, and this is the part that confirms I wasn't dreaming. It banged its head hard against the open window. The sound was loud and unmistakable, a solid thunk, like someone hitting wood with a melon. I bolted. I ran out of that room so fast I think my feet barely touched the ground. I burst into the family room where the adults were sitting, probably crying and babbling about something at my window. They didn't believe me. Not really. My dad gave me that patronizing there look and said, "You were just having a bad dream, kiddo." My mom was a bit more sympathetic, but still brushed it off. My uncle joked that maybe it was a raccoon, but even he didn't seem convinced by his own explanation. They walked me back to my room, made a show of checking the windows, which showed nothing unusual, but I absolutely refused to sleep with them open. I made them close and lock every single one, despite the suffocating heat. I remember my dad sighing as he did it, clearly annoyed but humoring his overreactive kid. I barely slept that night. I laid there sweating, staring at those windows until the sun came up. The next morning, I went outside to look. I'm not sure what I expected to find. Footprints maybe, but there was nothing obvious. Just the usual dirt and pine needles. What did strike me though, even as a kid, was the height. I was about 4.5 feet tall at 11, and I couldn't see into those windows from the outside without standing on something. Those windows were a good 5.5 feet off the ground. Whatever had been looking in at me would have needed to be well over 6 feet tall, or standing on something, to position its entire head in that window casement. As the days passed, the adults forgot about my nightmare, but I didn't. I started bringing a flashlight to bed. I refused to sleep near windows. If we stayed at the cottage and it was hot, I'd suffer through the heat rather than open a window. The years went by and I grew up, but I never forgot. Even as an adult, I'm 66 now, I refuse to sleep with open windows at that cottage. My family teases me about it, and I usually make some joke about mosquitoes. But the real reason has never changed. About 15 years ago, something happened that brought it all rushing back. I was at the cottage with my wife and our son, who was 12 at the time. It was late September, and we were closing the place up for the season. My wife had already gone to bed, and my son and I were playing cards in the family room. Around 11, we heard this cry from the woods behind the cottage. I've spent a lot of time in those woods over the years. I know what foxes sound like, what owls sound like, what every local animal sounds like. This wasn't any of those. The best way I can describe it is a cross between a coyote and a bird and a ghost. It was high-pitched but guttural at the same time, if that makes any sense. My son heard it too. His head snapped up from his cards and his eyes got wide. "What was that?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. The cry came again, closer this time. Then silence. We sat there, frozen, cards forgotten in our hands. That's when it happened. Something slammed against the side of the cottage. Hard. Like something big had thrown itself against the wooden wall. The whole structure shook. My son jumped up, knocking his chair over backward. I stood too, grabbing a flashlight from the drawer, but I didn't go outside to check. Some primal part of me knew better than to do that. Instead, I went through the cottage, checking that all the windows and doors were locked. They were. We didn't hear anything else that night, but neither of us slept much. The next morning, I checked the exterior of the cottage. There was a smudge on the wooden siding about 6 feet up. Just a smudge, like something had brushed against it. No damage, no obvious marks, nothing conclusive. But I knew. Whatever had watched me through the window when I was 11 had come back. Over the years, I've read about Sasquatch encounters and other stories from the Muskoka region. There are more than you might think. The descriptions vary, but many mention the same sense of being watched, the same overwhelming feeling of dread. Some describe dark, featureless faces. Some mention unusual cries in the woods. I don't know what was looking in my window that night in '68. I don't know if it's the same thing that returned 15 years ago. All I know is that I still won't sleep with the windows open at the cottage, even on the hottest nights. My family thinks I'm paranoid. My wife rolls her eyes when I make my nightly rounds, checking locks. Maybe I am paranoid. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that the sound of that head banging against the window frame was real. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm up at the cottage and everyone else is asleep, I think I can feel it out there in the dark, watching the house, waiting. For what, I don't know, and I hope I never find out. Story 17. I've been hunting these woods since I was 10. 22 years of early mornings, cold tree stands, and the familiar rhythm of the forest. I know what a deer sounds like moving through dry leaves. I know how raccoons shuffle, how coyotes trot, how bears lumber. But what happened last November? I still can't explain it. It was the 3rd day of deer season. I'd taken Friday off work for a long weekend of hunting. The morning hunt had been quiet. Just a couple of squirrels and a young doe I let pass. I packed a sandwich, an apple, and a thermos of coffee, then headed back out around 2 in the afternoon to my favorite stand. My stand is about 20 feet up in a massive oak that sits at the intersection of 3 game trails. It's been a reliable spot for years. I climbed up, secured my safety harness, and settled in with my 12 gauge across my lap. The Remington 870 has been my hunting companion for over a decade. Its weight in my hands is reassuring, familiar. The afternoon was cool, but not bitter. Mid-40s, I'd guess. The sky was overcast, threatening rain but never delivering. Perfect hunting weather. Animals move well when a storm's brewing. I scanned the surroundings methodically, like I always do. Check the trails, scan the tree line, watch for movement. 2 hours passed uneventfully. I'd seen a red fox trot through about an hour in, but nothing else. The forest was quiet, that comfortable late autumn silence where the summer insects are gone and the leaves have mostly fallen. Just the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. It must have been around 4:30 when something changed. I didn't hear anything at first. That's what bothers me most looking back. I felt it. Like when you're in your house alone and suddenly know someone else is there. A pressure change. The hair on my arms stood up before my conscious mind registered anything wrong. Then came the sound, not a noise I heard with my ears exactly, more like something I felt in my chest. A deep vibration, almost below the threshold of hearing, like when you feel the bass from a car stereo before you hear the music. It built gradually into what I can only describe as breathing. Heavy, deliberate breaths. Each exhalation felt like it was passing through my own body. Then came snorts, powerful, forceful bursts of air, followed by low bellows that seemed to echo through the hollow of the trees. I've heard bull elk bugle, I've heard moose calls, I've heard bears growl and mountain lions scream. This wasn't like any of those. It had a resonance, a depth that made my ribcage vibrate. My first thought was bear, but it wasn't right. Bears don't make sounds like that, and they certainly don't project them that way. I raised my shotgun, more out of instinct than any clear thought. My hands were trembling slightly, something that hadn't happened since my first hunt as a kid. The safety was already off. I always keep it ready when I'm in the stand. The light was starting to fade, that murky time when shadows grow, but you can still make out shapes. I scanned the area where I thought the sounds were coming from, about 40 yards to my northwest. Nothing at first, just trees and undergrowth, then movement caught my eye. Not at ground level where I expected, but higher up. Something was moving between the trees. Something tall, very tall. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to make it fit into familiar categories. It must be a bear standing on hind legs, or maybe two deer, one standing behind the other, creating an optical illusion. But as it moved again, stepping partially into a clearer area, I saw it for what it was. A figure, standing upright, approximately 9 feet tall. 9 feet tall. Even writing this now, I question myself, was it really that big? But I've hunted these woods for decades. I know how to judge distance and size. That oak tree next to it was one I'd walked past 100 times. I know it's about 12 feet to the first major branch. This thing's head was nearly at that branch. Its shape was broad, powerful, not thin like a bear standing upright. This had shoulders, a neck, a head. The proportions were almost human, but not quite. Longer arms, I think. But it was hard to tell for sure in the fading light. I brought up my gun, looking through the scope to get a better view. My hands were shaking badly now. Through the scope, I could see it was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. Not patchy like a mangy bear, but thick uniform. I couldn't get a clear shot. It kept moving, staying partially obscured behind trees. Smart, deliberate, like it knew exactly where cover was. Then it bellowed again. Jesus Christ, that sound. It wasn't just loud. It was physically powerful. I felt it pass through my body like a shock wave. My ears popped from the pressure change. I had my finger on the trigger, but I couldn't shoot. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I couldn't get a clear shot. And something deep inside was screaming that I didn't want this thing wounded and angry. It moved again, faster this time. Not running yet, but a purposeful stride that covered ground with frightening efficiency. It was moving parallel to my position, about 25 yards away now. 25 yards. In hunting terms, that's close. Point-blank range for a shotgun. Yet until it made those sounds, I'd had no idea it was there. No cracking twigs, no rustling leaves, nothing. How does something that size move that quietly? I swiveled in my stand, trying to keep it in sight, my shotgun tracking its movement. It stopped behind a thick pine, just a dark shape now in the growing dusk. Then everything changed. It moved. No, it exploded into motion, from near silence to chaos in an instant. It tore away from the tree line into thicker forest, and the sound was overwhelming, like a freight train plowing through the woods. Crashing limbs, pounding impacts on the ground, trees shaking. How could the same creature move like a ghost one moment and like a bulldozer the next? I lost sight of it quickly, but could track its retreat by the diminishing cacophony. After maybe 15 seconds, the forest fell silent again. Though my ears were ringing, I sat there, shotgun still raised, scanning desperately in all directions. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear anything else. Minutes passed, 5, 10, 15, nothing. Eventually, I became aware that my arms were aching from holding the gun up so long. I lowered it slightly, but kept it ready. The light was almost gone now. In my mind, I calculated how long it would take to get down from the stand and back to my truck. Too long, too dark. So I stayed, rigid with tension, until full darkness came. I had a small LED headlamp in my pocket. I debated using it. It would help me see, but also make me visible. In the end, necessity won. I couldn't climb down in the pitch black. The descent from my stand was the longest of my life. Every creak of metal, every rustle of my clothing sounded catastrophically loud. I kept the shotgun slung across my back, one hand always on the tree. At the bottom, I unclipped my safety harness with fumbling fingers and immediately readied my gun again. The walk back to my truck was a quarter-mile of pure, concentrated fear. I swept my light in continuous arcs, trying to see everything at once. Each shadow looked like a massive silhouette. Each rustle of wind sounded like breathing. When I finally reached my truck, I threw myself inside and locked the doors. I sat there shaking for several minutes before I could steady my hands enough to put the key in the ignition. I've been back to those woods since then. I'm not going to let fear keep me from hunting ground I've known my whole life. But I don't use that stand anymore, and I don't stay past early afternoon. What haunts me most isn't what I saw, though that image of the tall, dark figure is burned into my memory. It's the questions I can't answer. How did something that large approach within 25 yards of me without making a sound? I'm an experienced hunter. I pay attention. Nothing that size should be able to move that silently. Why did it reveal itself? It could have passed by without me ever knowing it was there. Did it want me to know? Was it warning me? And what was it? I've run through all the possibilities. Bear? No, bear is 9 feet tall on its hind legs with that body shape. Moose? Wrong region, wrong shape, wrong sound. Some guy in a suit, 9 feet tall, moving through dense woods silently. No way. I consider myself a rational person. I'm not quick to jump to fantastic explanations, but I've found no logical answer for what I experienced that day. All I know is this. There was something in those woods that shouldn't exist according to what I thought I knew about nature. Something intelligent enough to use cover, quiet enough to approach undetected, and powerful enough to make the ground shake when it ran. I still have my shotgun, I still hunt. But I keep looking over my shoulder now, and I never feel quite alone in the woods anymore. Story 18. I've never told this story to anyone outside our crew. Even now, 8 years later, I still feel a chill when I think about what we saw that night in the Trinity Alps. I'm not someone who believes in monsters or crazy conspiracy theories. I'm just a regular guy who's spent most of my adult life working wildland fires across the western states. But what happened during the Trinity Fire Complex in August 2015, I can't explain it. I've tried to rationalize it 1,000 times, but I can't. That summer was brutal. California was in the 4th year of a historic drought, and the forests were like tinderboxes waiting for a spark. When lightning storms rolled through Northern California in early August, they ignited dozens of fires that eventually merged into what they called the Trinity Fire Complex. By the time my crew got called in, it had already consumed over 20,000 acres and was growing fast. We'd been working 16-hour shifts for 3 days straight when it happened. That particular night, we were cutting containment lines along a steep ridge about 15 miles from the nearest road. The smoke was so thick you could barely see 20 feet ahead. The air was hot and filled with ash, making every breath feel like you were inhaling straight from a campfire. My eyes were stinging, my lungs burning. The only light came from our headlamps and the eerie orange glow of the fire that was slowly advancing toward us from the valley below. Our crew was spread out in a line, working our way up the ridge. I was operating a chainsaw, cutting through underbrush while the others followed behind with Pulaskis and other tools, clearing a fire break. The The noise from the saw drowned out most other sounds, but when I stopped to refuel around 11:30, I noticed something odd. There was this feeling in the air, hard to describe, like the pressure had changed suddenly. The forest had gone eerily quiet, except for the distant roar of the fire. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to have died down for a moment. I remember making eye contact with Luis, one of our more experienced guys. He felt it too, this sudden tension in the air. That's when we heard it. Heavy movement in the brush ahead of us, up toward the top of the ridge, not like a deer or even a bear. This was something big, really big. The footfalls were heavy, deliberate. Crack, 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 breaking branches and moving with purpose. At first I thought maybe it was another fire crew coming in from the other side, but we knew we were the only team assigned to this section. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered behind me. We all instinctively reached for our headlamps, directing them up the slope. The beams cut through the smoke, but revealed nothing but trees and brush. The footsteps continued, moving across the ridge maybe 80 yards ahead of us. Our crew leader, Martinez, motioned for us to hold position. We stood there, frozen, tools in hand, straining to see through the haze. The orange glow from the approaching fire backlit the ridge, creating this surreal, apocalyptic scene. That's when I saw it. Through the smoke, silhouetted against the fiery sky, was a figure. Not hunched over like a bear, but upright, walking on two legs. My first thought was that it was another firefighter, but as I watched it move across a small clearing at the top of the ridge, I realized this was no human. This thing was massive. I'm 6'2", and this creature towered over any person I've ever seen. 8 feet tall at minimum, maybe more. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. Impossibly broad shoulders, a massive barrel chest, and arms that hung lower than any person's should. And the way it moved, God, the way it moved was the most unsettling part. Despite the steep, rocky terrain, it walked with this fluid, athletic grace that seemed impossible for something that size. As it reached the clearing on the ridge, it paused, and then it turned and looked directly at us. Even now, I get goosebumps remembering this moment. Through the smoke and distance, I could clearly see its face caught in the glow of our headlamps and the orange light from the fire. It had this pronounced brow, flat nose, and deep-set eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's. Its face wasn't covered in as much hair as its body, almost like a gorilla, but not exactly. The hair covering its body was dark, matted with ash and soot from the fire. We all saw it. 8 grown men, experienced firefighters who've seen all kinds of wildlife in all kinds of conditions, and we all stood there, completely stunned. What struck me most was how calm it seemed. Every other animal we'd encountered that night was in a panic, fleeing the advancing flames. But this thing moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. It wasn't running scared, it was evacuating. Deliberately, it stared at us for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Then it just turned and continued walking, disappearing into the canyon on the other side of the ridge. No one spoke for what seemed like minutes. The only sound was the distant crackling of the approaching fire and our own breathing. Finally, Martinez broke the silence. "Did everyone just see that?" he asked, his voice unusually quiet. We all nodded or mumbled yes. No one could take their eyes off the spot where the creature had disappeared. "What the fuck was that?" Luis whispered. "A bear?" But we all knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk upright like that. Not for that distance, and not with that gait, and it was too tall, too proportionally different. "We need to keep moving," Martinez finally said, snapping back into crew leader mode. "Fire's still coming. We have a job to do." He was right. Whatever we'd just seen, we still had a wildfire to contain. We got back to work, but there was this electric tension among us. Everyone kept looking up toward the ridge, half expecting the creature to reappear. We worked for another hour, finishing our section of the containment line. No one talked much. What was there to say? We'd all seen it, but none of us had the words to process it. When we finally took a break around 1 in the morning, we huddled together near a relatively clear area. That's when we started comparing notes. I'll never forget that conversation. 8 exhausted, smoke-stained firefighters sitting in the dirt, trying to make sense of something that shouldn't exist. The details were consistent across all of us. Everyone described the same height, at least 8 feet tall, possibly 9. The same massive build with extremely developed muscles, especially in the shoulders and chest. Everyone noticed what Pedro called the cone-shaped head that seemed to sit directly on the shoulders with almost no visible neck. We all commented on the long arms that swung naturally as it walked and the dark hair covered in ash. "That was a Bigfoot," Pedro finally said, saying out loud what we were all thinking. Some of the guys nodded. A couple looked uncomfortable. "Look, I know how it sounds," Martinez said, rubbing his face with his hands. "But whatever that was, it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I've ever seen in these mountains." "We should report it," someone suggested. Martinez shook his head. "And say what? That we saw Bigfoot running from a wildfire? We'd be laughingstocks. They'd probably make us take drug tests." He was right. There was no way to report what we'd seen without sounding crazy. And we had reputations to protect, careers in fire management. Being labeled as the crew that saw Bigfoot wouldn't exactly help our professional standing. We agreed to keep it between ourselves. Just the 8 of us would know what happened that night. The rest of that shift was tense. We finished our assignment, but everyone was on edge. Every noise in the forest made us jump. I kept imagining I saw movement in the trees, shadows that weren't there. When dawn finally came and we hiked back to the staging area for shift change, the whole experience took on an almost dreamlike quality in the morning light. Had we really seen what we thought we saw? Or was it just exhaustion and smoke playing tricks on our eyes? But I know what I saw. We all do. Looking back now, I think the wildfire did something unusual that night. It forced things hidden in the deepest parts of those mountains to move, to evacuate. Things that normally stay well away from humans. The fire had driven this creature from its territory, forcing it into the open where our paths crossed. In the days that followed, as we continued fighting that fire, I found myself watching the ridgelines, hoping or maybe fearing that I'd see it again. I never did. None of us did. We never filed an official report. What would we have said that we saw an 8-foot-tall, hair-covered humanoid calmly walking away from a forest fire? That would have ended up in some filing cabinet labeled stress-induced hallucinations, or worse. But in the years since, I've done my research. I've read about other sightings in the Trinity Alps and surrounding areas going back decades. Stories from hunters, hikers, forestry workers, many describing exactly what we saw that night. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. Hell, if someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were full of shit or had been drinking on the job. All I know is what my crew and I witnessed that night in August 2015. Something lives in those mountains. Something intelligent enough to have an evacuation plan for forest fires. Something that looks at humans with recognition and awareness. I still work wildland fires every summer, but now, when I'm deep in the backcountry, cutting line or mopping up hotspots, I find myself looking over my shoulder more often, scanning the ridgelines, listening for heavy footsteps in the brush. Because once you've seen something you can't explain, you can never unsee it. You just learn to live with the knowledge that the world is bigger and stranger than most people will ever know.